Okay, we're going to try to start on Dutch Standard Time, which I think is usually on time. So welcome everybody to the Global AI Policy Research Summit. And this is the second day of the summit. We're really delighted that Helma and Taylor have brought us together organizing it. The first day was super insightful, great panel discussions. And today there are 3 parallel workshops, including ours. So Peter, Ericson, and I are hosting this workshop on AI and warfare, actions, policies, and practices. And we may have more people trickling in through the afternoon, but we can also have a really nice, intimate discussion because these are topics we all care deeply about. So Peter is from the AI Policy Lab and a postdoc researcher at Umeå University, and I'm based as a visiting researcher at University of the Arts, Helsinki, the research institute there. I was previously at Aalto University. And we both have solid interests in this area, though we're not experts in it. And for that reason, we've invited a number of experts to join us who we will be having conversations with. So Virginia Dignum is Professor of Responsible AI at Umeå University and also a member of the high-level advisory board on AI. I was a member. You okay? Doesn't exist. Okay.
Doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, we cannot call ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. You can tell us more about that. Okay. And then Martine Jaarsma, I believe, are you Martine? Yes. Hey, hello. I didn't notice you were here earlier. She's a doctoral researcher in international humanitarian law. And she was previously, I believe, doing her doctoral research at University of Utrecht. Or were you working closely with Lauren? Okay, great. Well, you can tell us more about your trajectory when you join us on the panel. Megan is here online. She is a policy specialist at Airwars and also a dear person I've gotten to know over the last year. She'll be presenting some work that Airwars is doing in this area. 𝗪𝗃𝗁𝗪𝗃𝗁, if I say it correctly, is a Chief of Staff Joint Commander and a research fellow at the Netherlands Defense Academy. My slide isn't accurate. And you're based here in the Netherlands. And Taylor actually is based at the Asser Institute as a doctoral researcher in public international law. And she's joining us from The Hague. And Rainer, I think, made a nice train trip overnight from Berlin. And he's a researcher at the Weizenbaum Institute. So we have really fantastic specialists to be in dialogue with. And we'll be having a robust panel discussion for about an hour shortly. But I want to start us off to ask, give us a sense of how you want to run this session today. So we'll do some opening sort of remarks and set the stage for why we're discussing this topic and why we're discussing it in a policy research summit. We will then ask our panelists to give some perspectives together and open up discussions with the audience. After a short break, we'll get into 3 thematic groups, and maybe for a smaller subset, we'll just have 2. And we'd like to have us, in a participatory way, deliberate on some key outcomes that we'd like to see going forward, and then have a report back and wrap up. So let me set the stage here by sharing an article that Lucy Suchman wrote for the AI Now Institute's blog. This was already in January of last year. And she was talking about this. Lucy Suchman's an esteemed computer scientist, and she was talking about the notion of algorithmically accelerated killing machines. And for her, I think the concern was since the war in Gaza began, there has been a whole shift in the discourse and a whole shift of technologies that we hadn't seen being used in the battlefield before in ways that is, in at least for many experts, in contravention to international humanitarian law. And the scale at which target generation and unfortunate civilian harm occurred was amplified by the role of AI technologies in the battlefield. And this mobilization of algorithmic intensification to accelerate target production, she believes should be understood within a wider techno-political context, what she'd like to call the network-centric warfare. So now warfare as we see it is being conducted through a network set of technologies, sensing systems, prediction systems, surveillance systems, all working in conjunction, and often designed to do precision targeting, but leading to often amplified civilian harm. And I was tempted to show this article because we have with us a postdoc researcher, 𝗪𝗲𝗄, who's back in the back. And if I had known you were coming, we would have brought you directly into the panel, but you will have a chance to discuss this. And 𝗪𝗲𝗄 also wrote about this, it was in May of last year, about the phenomena that he was noticing. 𝗪𝗲𝗄 commented on an article by Yuval Abraham called The Mass Assassination Factory, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but talked about the range of technologies that are being used in the battlefield in the Israeli context, and we'll have a chance to hear from you thereafter. So this was the article that set many of us having alarm bells, at least us as computer science researchers, who perhaps were a bit isolated from what happens on the battlefield. But journalists doing investigative journalism have been highlighting this issue for over 2 years now. And we in the academic research community are quite behind in understanding the implications of it, and not to mention actually doing something to prevent the use of these systems for civilian harm. This article made a lot of shockwaves. It was in PLOS 972 magazine, and it talked about this kind of targeted systems that are being used in conjunction to amplify the selection and unfortunate harm to civilians, where even a single target, you could have a hit rate of 20 to 100 civilians that were considered normal casualties. And this is just one of many systems that Yuval and Sophia Goodfriend, who are both at PLOS 972, talked about in their investigative reporting. The Lavender system, Hasbara system, Where's Daddy, the use of ChatGPT most recently, and so on and so forth. These reports are coming out at such a breakneck pace that we in the research community are barely even keeping up with what's happening. But the military systems are basically adopting all these technologies at a very fast pace, which also means that legal and policy and regulatory outcomes are lagging very much behind in terms of addressing this. One other person who Lucy Suchman mentioned, and many of us have read his work, is Anthony Loewenstein. He wrote this book 2 years ago, The Palestine Laboratory, talking a lot about how Israeli armed forces are using implicitly or explicitly the Palestinian context to develop weapons of surveillance, monitoring, and unfortunately targeted harm, and then exporting that technology around the world. I met Anthony in 2010 on my way to Gaza when I was doing some work on the ground on psychosocial mental health issues and working on a documentary film there. So Anthony and I kept in touch over the years, and I was really happy to see some of his reporting being picked up very widely in the international media. For that reason, last October, I organized a symposium in Helsinki. It was a transdisciplinary symposium where we had our opening keynotes from Lauren and Jessica at Utrecht Conflict Studies program. Anthony joined us online, and there were many extraordinary panel discussions on the role of autonomous weapons, big data, and what's happening, and the responsibility for regulators and EU policy on these issues. So This was a discussion that was much needed, and what was surprising to me was very few of my colleagues were having that discussion in any of the forums that I was visiting. So I felt it was necessary to at least initiate, and it's hopefully not the only forum where this discussion is happening, but there were very few. And Megan also joined us online for that symposium. These are just a couple of images from the symposium. And here is a brief website. If you have a chance, we've actually put all of our talks, panel discussions, all online. So you can take a look at the what came out of the discussions. So I felt it necessary to kind of have a follow-up to this symposium, and which is why we wanted to do a workshop here to look at what has happened since and what is the state of the art. But maybe I'll just show you this last thing before I pass it off to Peter. This is a short video report that a journalist did at our symposium, and it covers some of the issues we were discussing. I'm hoping it will play.
Newsmax is in Finland for the Nordic region's largest annual gathering on AI research. Industry experts, government officials, and the leading minds in machine learning and artificial intelligence convene to discuss the geopolitics of technology, critical challenges in the field, and strategies for managing the rapid advancement of AI. Take a listen.
So my name's 𝗪𝗿𝗄𝗄. I'm an assistant professor in the field of conflict and war studies at Utrecht University. And basically I investigate the changing character of warfare and its impact on both civilian harm in localities of war, but also on the democratic control over war. So I look mostly at how Western advanced militaries wage war in the 21st century and how this has changed. We've seen the rise of the role of algorithms and machine learning in warfare. So this is a new change in the way that war is being fought. And what we've been talking about today is, in fact, the realities that we're seeing of the use of this type of technology in warfare, how it's speeding up warfare. And are we not maybe blindsided by this idea that technology is going to be a solution to very complex political problems? And are we not moving away from actually understanding how we can create more peace and security for everybody worldwide? What's really important is that we're all part of this infrastructure, and I think we have to fundamentally question what that is doing to our societies and what it means to be a society who's producing these technologies. And I think a lot more critical debate and research needs to be done.
I'm Nitin Sawhney. I'm a professor. I'm going to skip past myself if I can find a way to do it, and then give the stage to Peter. There should be a way for me to get past that. Yeah, there we go. So I'll let you take it from here. Hopefully everything is working. Yes.
Hopefully, yes. Just maybe a brief introduction to hi Megan. So I'm Petter Ericson. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I'm a staff scientist actually at the 𝗪𝗿𝗰𝗆 lab in Umeå University. And I'm very happy for Nitin to have pulled this together. I have helped surely, but I would certainly give Nitin most of the honors here. But yeah, so continuing on from these perspectives on the introduction and sort of loss of democratic control. This is a recent article about how the Ukraine war in particular has had these kind of market logics, quote unquote, imported into them through this like gamification of drone warfare, and they even mentioned this Amazon for war, which is where different units of the Ukraine army can sort of get more or less and different types of materials delivered to them. And
if they score well on the leaderboard.
If they score well on the leaderboard, which I think is another sort of illustrative example of the impact of tech in war, apart from sort of the premier example of Gaza. And relating this back not just to tech but to AI, the US military is very much in love with AI and has been for a long time. This graph, which, as Rainer noted, doesn't really have a scale on the y-axis, is from a 2020 special issue of the AI magazine about DARPA's impact on artificial intelligence. And So this is mostly just to illustrate that this is not something that is hidden. The connection, the historical connection, the long-term connection between the field of AI, especially in the US, and the US military in particular, is something that is even proudly advertised in this way. And as researchers in AI, as people working in the field, that is something that we should be aware of and perhaps reckon with. And to sort of one person who I think is doing that really well is an Italian researcher named 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪, who I had the privilege of meeting this summer. Unfortunately, I wanted him to be here really as an expert, but he couldn't be. So it is up to me to sort of give a little bit of a short spiel of his findings. The connection, as I said, is historical. It's a long term. This is the recent sort of integration of big tech specifically. So in this case, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, and the federal government, the US federal government. So this is the number of US federal contracts given through procurement processes to those 4 companies in particular. You can see that the spike from Obama is pretty notable. That is one thing, and the sort of techification and the export into the private sector of public function is one thing, but it gets really noticeable if you look at the amount of money. So this is not the same exact as here's 2008, there's 2008. I can take the chairs out. And so these are the dollar amounts. And the differentiation here is not by company, but by department. And so the black bars here, those are for the Department of Defense. So those are the military contracts given to the big tech and the dollar amounts. And you can see the million US dollars over there. And to be clear, these are the public ones. It is likely that there are a lot more that were secret or top secret. There's Amazon, for example, who is a big both contractor and subcontractor for cloud services, has what they call top secret West and top secret West, the top secret East and the top secret West regions in their Amazon Web Services system, and Microsoft as well also has these specific cloud regions which are made for top secret material. And so that kind of shows the historical and current integration of specifically big tech and the US military, right? And that goes into something that could be termed the digital military industrial complex of that has been sort of evolving over a long time. The relationships between DARPA, AI research, and so on is long term, but especially since the 80s and 90s, the integration has been getting tighter and more pronounced. So the US military provides both like technology and research funding, but also access. You get special treatments, perhaps according to law, and diplomatic help to establish yourself abroad by being a good partner to the US military. They also provide, as in the Palestine laboratory, testing grounds for algorithms, for technology to the big tech companies. And the big tech companies in turn provide various services. They also provide a massive amount of data because, of course, if you have this tight integration, you can also do surveillance of regular people, or just adversaries. I mean, the mass surveillance programs that were sort of leaked by Edward Snowden, I don't think that they have stopped, and it is, I would say, more likely that they have been more integrated and more accepted, especially as the integration of big tech with the US state and the US military has sort of increased. Another service that is kind of provided by big tech in this and their platforms in this way is a way of soft power, of tying states and organizations to the US by way of, for example, if you end up on the shit list, if you are being sanctioned, maybe you don't get access to any of the platforms anymore, and you can get shut down if you are heavily integrated into these platforms. We have the specific case of Karim Khan and the ICC, who are hosting their emails on Microsoft servers and then got sanctioned by the US government, and that shuts down their email accounts. So it's a kind of a mix of soft and hard power here. But then you also get flexibility through these commercial actors and cover for some specific actions. And that gives also private actors more political power, right? This is a two-way street. You get a lot of services, you get a lot of coverage, you can sort of outsource things, but also that means that the big tech side also has more influence in the workings of the state, right? So this is just one specific example from the war context, but of course this matters also in other areas where so this is recent reporting of an old incident, let's say. So this is about Elon Musk having personally ordered the shutdown of Starlink access to the Ukraine military in Kherson, I believe. There was a separate instance where Starlink was previously reported to have been shut down in Crimea. But this is another instance of this, of people who are in charge of these private companies having a very real political impact on where and how war can be enacted. And that can be good for good, but that can also be for bad, depending on sort of how you see things. So that's just sort of one thing that I think needs to be kept in mind, this tight integration of the US military and the big tech companies, and the long history of US military influence in the field of AI. So that also has legal consequences, right? Because the genocide in Gaza in particular has been well documented, and the recent reports, relatively recent, by Francesca Albanese into corporate complicity.
Continue.
Yeah, in corporate complicity in this genocide could have real legal consequences for executives in those companies and for sort of their workings going forward. In theory, if the international legal order is something that actually will hold going forward, of course. So, look, there we go. So we're now going to move to our panelists and allow them to have their own perspectives, because this is also about having different perspectives on these issues, right? So just a quick rundown. We'll have some discussion from Virginia first on the dual use and responsibility, and that WoW should be a who. How, I think. Yeah, it was how, yeah. So I apologize for that. I think WoW is also fitting, yeah. Followed by Taylor on human machine learning interactions and distinctions, precautions and proportionality assessments in armed conflict. Martine will weigh in tentatively on AI decision support systems in targeting and the construction of legal categories by private companies, just as mentioned. Ilse will be giving a military perspective on comprehensive human oversight of military AI systems from quote unquote within the system, or at least within one of the systems. And then Megan will talk about the role of AI-based systems in increasing the speed and scope of risks specifically to civilians caught in conflict. And Rainer will bring it all home with talking about the technically deconstructing AI-based targeted killing as a moral red herring to actually enable genocide. And yeah.
I can invite everybody to just come on stage and we can let you
get situated.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's almost power play.
Where are you sitting?
I will be running around the room. Okay. So, should we leave the?
Yeah, so in the order.
Yeah. So.
Taking all this.
Yes. And if anything doesn't need to be on, you can take it off.
Okay, I suppose I can be controversial.
Yes, that's why you're here.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay, so let me start by saying that my salary is paid by military, your salary is paid by military, your salary is paid by military. And by that, I just want to make a kind of, how you say it, a more balanced understanding of how, for instance, the DARPA influence on AI can be understood. And that when I say my salary is paid by the military, for a large part, our project or our group, AI Policy Lab, is financed by the 𝗪𝗿𝗰 foundations. The 𝗪𝗿𝗰 foundations are financed themselves by the 𝗪𝗿𝗰 corporations, and the 𝗪𝗿𝗰 corporations, especially through SAP, have a lot of inputs from the military. That is, I don't feel at all constrained or influenced by the origins of this money. I have never had any issue about saying whatever I want. The same with my colleagues that received money from DARPA in the 80s, in the 90s, and so on. Your curve is exactly the same curve as the AI winters and seasons. DARPA has, at least at that time, I cannot really say exactly how DARPA works at this moment, but I've been involved in AI since the 80s and end of the 80s. And for a large part, AI was, DARPA was financing not only AI, but fundamental research on many, many different topics with the same type of freedom that I feel I have with the funding that I have for my research at this moment. So we can say, yes, AI is, the military loves AI, probably, like any other industry loves AI at this moment. All technology, if we go back to the stones and bricks of the, but not bricks there, I don't see that bricks there. The stones and sticks of the prehistory has been fundamentally driven by conflict and by the necessity to defend yourself and defend sometimes by attacking in conflict. So technology is fundamentally and distinctly connect to defense, to conflict, to military, if you want. So just to put the things a little bit in proportion, how these connections are. So a lot of the funding that DARPA has given for research has, like you would say, non-strings attached type of funding. Worse than DARPA, I mean, I was there. I worked with people there. It's as much strings they had at that time. Again, I'm not saying what is today, but at that time they had as many strings as you have. Anyway, worse than that and more concerning than that is the current influence of big tech and private companies in the military in the way that AI is being used in, and that's the kind of the dual use of AI that I want to start with. Again, it's very easy to talk about AI in the military as one big thing, like we talk about AI meaning everything and anything. I think that it's very important to distinguish, and especially for us working on policy, or for me working on policy, let me make it personal, the operational uses of AI in the field are concerning, are at least are impactful, definitely, but I don't think, from my perspective, are the most interesting topics that I address in my direct work. So we need to distinguish between using AI in the battlefield or in the operationally used of AI, from the strategic use of AI, and even more up than that, the intentions and the policies that guide the use of AI in the field. That's what I'm more interested and more focused than on the killer robots or the drones or the direct implementation. And I'm not saying that that's not, it's definitely impactful, it's definitely relevant. But on the other hand, if they were not using AI, the impact in the field and the weapons and the technology that they would be using another technology, but the operational use, I think that it's kind of independent of whether it's AI or not. We do influence in the ways that we develop AI, make possible to use AI in those type of products. But again, from my perspective and from work that I do, I think that the strategic and policy involvement or the capabilities of having AI involved at that level are more concerning and more direct to the work that I do than the killer robots that is the image that all of us get when we talk about AI and the military. It is important, and especially in the military, I think that issues like the question zero that we have been working on, sorry, someone is already complaining that I'm talking too much. I was listening to this, but it's complaining. We'll see what comes out of it. Anyway, where I was. The question zero is an extremely relevant one. And now I only see telephones and not something else. Good. Now I got lost. Sorry. It applies strongly to defense. Examining the purpose, the necessity, the proportionality, and alternatives that are there before using AI at any level, strategic, operational, or whatever in the military is crucial. So if anything, we need to start there. We need to start with the question zero. And we also need to start by making it very clear or very open the discussion. AI is not going to fix any geopolitical tensions. It's also not going in itself to generate geopolitical tensions where they are not there. The mistrust, the structural insecurity, and the broader political and the diplomatic efforts and context in which we are is not something that AI is going to solve for us. So the idea of AI as replacing or solving military judgment and military decisions is a more concerning one for me than the use of AI in the battlefield, let's say. Over-reliance on automation, I think that it mostly increases the strategic risk for those that are over-relying on that technology. And that is where I think that the importance of the discussion with the defense field is much more on this discussion about over-reliance on AI. AI is not going to solve or to get rid of the tensions and the issues that are there. And also, it is, at the end of the day, like always, it is a human choice, is not an inevitability, is not a must. It is one of the factors in the discussion of the AI race, especially in the military. We see a lot of this, one rushing after the other. But the point that I want to make, and that's the how or the wow probably, is that it is at the end of the day a choice of governments, a choice of international agencies, a choice of people. And this choice and this understanding the options, understanding the impact that we need to, from my perspective, focus more, and especially if we are talking about AI policy, than necessarily on the operational aspects. And I think I have done more. And I think, yeah, the issue of proportionality is an important one. And at the end of the day, the military outcomes are shaped by people. The decisions, the military decisions, the AI will increase and amplify the harm that can be done with military operations, but the decisions at the end of the day are people. And therefore, I think that issues around question zero and around really examining the purpose and the necessity and the proportionality needs to be much more the focus of what we do than the direct applications. But again, just to start the discussion and to make things maybe a bit more controversial, for the sake of the discussion, of course.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Taylor Woodcock. I'm based at the Asser Institute. I'm a researcher in the Disruptive Technologies and International Law Research strand. And I also completed my PhD thesis research in the context of a project called the 𝗪𝗪 project, which is on designing international law and ethics into military AI. This was a 4-year project that concluded earlier this year, looking at military AI from legal, philosophical, and technical perspectives. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit this morning about the research that has come out of that, and specifically on human-machine learning interactions with regard to military AI. So when we're talking about international law frameworks, when it comes to armed conflict, there are a couple of different frameworks that are applicable, but the one that is the most relevant and that we're discussing the most is international humanitarian law. When it comes to requirements of targeting, there are 3 principles that I'm going to speak to. The principle of distinction, of proportions, and proportionality. And these are really the fundamental requirements for lawful targeting in armed conflict. Distinction requires distinguishing lawful targets from civilians and civilian objects. Precautions entails taking constant care to avoid or minimize harm and to take all feasible precautions to do so. And then, of course, proportionality assessments in this context relate to determining whether any harm would be excessive with respect to the military advantage gained. And we have these principles that come from the Geneva Conventions and additional protocols, but rather than looking at them really as just frameworks that require certain outcomes, what I would like to emphasize is that really these principles require decision-making processes and standards of decision-making. And so rather than looking at how AI will just affect the outcomes, it's also really important to look at how it affects the decision-making processes and the legal reasoning that takes place within these legal assessments within the battlefield. Now, of course, this isn't the only legal framework that applies in armed conflict. We also have the international human rights law. And just briefly to also mention that to the extent that these sorts of applications that are used by militaries can also be used outside of the context of armed conflict. So in kind of law enforcement or other security operations, then international human rights law should play or does play a much bigger role. And so when we're considering military AI, we really need to have this contextual assessment based on which framework is applicable, and there are different requirements. So when I'm talking about military AI, I mean, in debates, typically this has revolved around autonomous weapon systems that identify, select, and engage targets without human interventions. But I think part of the 𝗪𝗪 project's research, my own research, is to really emphasize that there are other applications such as decision support systems that really are being integrated already today. And I think there are a number of presentations that speak to this specifically, and I think that just goes to show that when thinking about pathways and policy and regulatory efforts, really emphasizing these kinds of applications that are not necessarily associated with this kind of hardware-based platform that we might have in mind with a killer robot, but really these kind of interconnected systems of systems that integrate all kinds of AI, that policy efforts and regulatory efforts really should be focusing on these, which I think to date, at least in the context of the group of governmental experts on lethal autonomous weapons, has not been the case. So when discussing decision support systems, these are kind of a range of applications. It could be for intelligence, it could be directly for identification of targets, it could be for logistics, but I'm going to speak more to the intelligence and targeting components. And we do see examples of this today. We have Palantir's Gotham system, the US Sentinel system, or the Chinese 𝗣𝗪𝗁 system, all of which leverage AI to find patterns in data sets and produce and disseminate intelligence information. Militaries developing large language models to support military commanders in conducting targeting operations. And of course, applications in real life, whether it be in Ukraine or in Gaza. And of course, I think we're all well aware of the reports on the kind of systems that are used to identify militants, members of Hamas specifically in the Gaza context, to identify where they operate, but to also identify civilians. And I think this is an example of a system that at face value can look really beneficial, that we of course want to mitigate civilian harm, but this can also go on to shape kind of our understanding of who counts as a civilian and who doesn't, and shaping these legal categories, which I think we're going to hear more from Martine. So really underlying the debates tends to be this question of the human versus the machine and which performs better. And this is something that I would really like to push against. And I think this is my main point, is that this kind of rhetorics around human machine comparison really obfuscates that, well, the socio-technical component that humans and machines kind of interact. And it's not just a case that specific discrete tasks can be interchanged. A human would have done that, and now we're giving it to an AI system, but rather that interaction reshapes the broader targeting practices within this context. And I think this is something that really needs to be kept in mind for our analysis of these systems. So are they appropriate? Are they ethical? Is their use ethical? Is their use lawful? But also for shaping policy and regulatory efforts, for really having this interactional component at the forefront, and questioning, well, it's not a matter of better, but it's a matter of different. So when kind of we look at this interactional component and how the use of AI technologies and these interactions reshape practices, this can also reshape practices with regards to law and to legal assessments. And these are these legal assessments that I mentioned at the top. The distinction of targets and civilians, determining what kinds of measures might be feasible to avoid harm, and whether there is proportionality. So I'm just going to speak to each one of these very briefly. So when it comes to distinguishing targets, we have these categories that are embedded in the law. Combatants, we have civilians who are directly participating in hostilities, we have members of non-state armed groups, but these categories are not fixed abstract categories. They're categories that require contextual interpretation in the circumstances. So when relying on AI to kind of produce, and when I say AI, I'm specifically talking about machine learning in this context, to produce predictions about who is a target, who is a civilian, this really kind of contribute to framing information and providing a lens to see what are the facts on the battle space. And this really lens reinforces the logics by which the model operates. And I mean that both from a technical perspective, but also a socio-technical perspective. We have these models that are producing predictions on the basis of associations, approximations, and generalizations. So there's that lens, but also these technologies are often viewed as more objective, more neutral, which kind of hides the fact that there are so many human decisions that led up to the production of these technologies, and so many subjectivities and biases already embedded, that this can kind of shape what we see as facts, but also legally relevant facts. So what constitutes a target on the battlefield. We also have these systems kind of shaping the decision space in terms of speed and scale and complexity. And this can also contribute to shaping the legal interpretations in terms of what's reasonable and what's feasible. So when we have assessments on precautions or proportionality, these are what sort of precautions are feasible. Is this determination of proportionality, is that a reasonable assessment? And international humanitarian law, we have this reasonable commander standard. Now, these are open textured, contextual standards. There is no kind of abstract definition of what counts as reasonable, what counts as feasible precautions. So when we have these decisions spaces that are significantly accelerated, that are analyzing kind of huge swaths of data at a very high level of complexity and opacity, but that are kind of presented through simplified smart interfaces, then that can really go towards shaping how decision makers kind of think about what's reasonable and what's feasible in the circumstances. This can also contribute to kind of prompting these cognitive biases that already exist in human beings, but that kind of cause this over-reliance on the system that seems smarter, that seems better, that seems more objective, and that kind of creates this seamlessness in decision spaces that is really hard to intervene against. So this can lead to kind of limited verification and over-reliance on AI systems. And I think one of the key things that needs to be kind of considered here is that these interactions need to be studied so that efforts can be taken to mitigate these risks and ensure that there can be verification and that there is verification of the nature of a target, of the kind of elements of these open textured assessments that are really qualitative analysis about kind of value-based judgments about the value of human life when determining whether losses are going to be excessive compared to military advantage. And so this can be kind of the cost of speed and also understandings around accuracy in this space. Often there are these accuracy rates that are touted, you know, this system kind of operates with 95% accuracy, but this really gives a limited understanding of how the systems are going to operate once they're deployed in different contexts, and they're going to operate in different ways in different contexts, and particularly with a situation and a context like armed conflict, it's really an environment where you can expect the unexpected, and where there is this nuance and novelty and the kind of brittleness of machine learning systems. This is really where it struggles. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and just to say that kind of closer study and understanding of how really the interactions between kind of military commanders, legal advisors, and the AI systems that they're using to support their decision making, how that can have kind of cascading effects for legal decisions, how it can shape understandings of targets and distinctions, how it can also shape legal interpretations about what counts as feasible proportions, what counts as a reasonable assessment, and really understanding that from a contextual basis really should be the basis of analyzing these systems, but also making policy and regulatory decisions now. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Well, I'll pick up from there then. I'll bring together two threads that were previously mentioned. So like Taylor explained initially, the debate on the use of AI in the military context was very much framed around this killer robot campaign. And the debate centered around who should get to make these lethal decisions. Should it be humans? Because they themselves are mortal, so they understand the impact of taking a life more, or should it be algorithms that are more quote-unquote objective? But in the last few years, the discussion has moved beyond this dichotomy and beyond the idea of human in the loop towards the idea that algorithms and humans mutually shape the decision-making processes, and that it matters the different ways, the different configurations in which they are put together. And if you put them together differently, they shape each other's decision-making processes differently. And Taylor's already done great work on that. And at the same time, we see another development, which is that these technologies are generally, there are some exceptions, not developed in-house in the military, but the military buys them sort of off the shelf with some alterations and supervised implementations, but they largely buy a ready-made technology developed by a private company. Usually, in the case of the West, an US-based private company, so Silicon Valley. So what I am looking at is, because AI is not one thing, there's many different types of technologies that we all call AI. There is the good old-fashioned AI of the 80s, that's a rule-based algorithm. There are supervised learnings, regression-based, classification-based. There's unsupervised learning. There's many different ways in which you can do that. There's reinforcement learning. And there's also a lot of different kinds of military AI companies. There is the specialized ones like Palantir or Anduril, and there is the general tech companies that have now gotten into military AI, like Google, Microsoft, Amazon. So all these companies will deliver very different type of AI products that work differently. And if the AI product works differently, it shapes military decision-making differently. I myself, I'm a lawyer, and the reason I'm looking at this, which seems to not be a legal topic at first sight, is the way the technology works shapes the way military legal decision-making is possible. Like Taylor explains, IHL has very open terms that are very open to context and interpretation. And the way the technologies work will facilitate or encourage some ways of thinking and decision-making and close up others. So that's why I'm so interested in what type of AI products these companies are developing and how they work. So with a fancy word, I would call this the ontological and epistemological power of these AI technologies. In other words, these AI technologies get to reshape how the military knows things and what they think they know. And that in turn reshapes reports. So specifically, I am looking at Maven. And the reason I look at Maven is because both Google and Palantir have done their attempt at developing Maven. Initially, it was developed by Google, but then Google pulled out pressure by its own employees. And then Palantir took over. And Google and Maven are good examples of how different companies have a very different approach to developing the same product. So Google is very much a data company. Google has Google Maps. It has developed self-driving cars. It has Google Search. It has a very large ad business. And because it has all those businesses, it has all that data. So Google's Maven was based on identifying objects. So Google has lots of data because it has Google Maps. So it can very well train its own algorithms on that visual data and teach it to classify, this is a tank, this is a building, this looks like a hospital. And then that product can be used, can be applied to the US's drone surveillance data, and then there it can classify objects. Palantir, on the other hand, is very emphatic that they are not a data company. They have these stack of products, Apollo, Foundry, Gotham, that they bring to organizations to let the organizations use the data sets they have already got access to. So what Palantir contributes to organizations is, these are called semantic technologies and an ontology, to link together these data sets in a way that they are searchable for the organization, and that the organization through one entry point can access all these data sets at the same time and visualize them. And Google has its origins as a search machine, so they have a semantic map of the internet. So what different topics are related according to them on the internet. Whereas Palantir had its origins as, it was seed funded by the CIA, and from the beginning it worked with the CIA. And its technology is very much developed to bring into view a network of individuals that are involved in either crime, terrorism. So what I'm interested in my PhD project is, how does Palantir's Maven work? How is that different from how Google's Maven would have worked? And how is that going to shape NATO's military legal decision making and shape the legal process? And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Short introduction, because I was paid by the military, obvious.
More directly.
More directly. I'm actually currently the chief of staff of our IT command, because it is the IT company of the army. And then the whole Ministry of Defense. So we build the software, we build the architectures that our soldiers are working with. So that gives me quite a unique perspective on this view also. I completed my PhD, I think it's 1.5 years ago now, in March 2024 at Delft, under the supervision from Virginia. And I took a little research break, because after a PhD you just have to catch your breath, and then it started to boil again, and I thought, okay, water, please, yeah. And I thought, okay, I wanted to start up my research again. I was lucky to get a research fellowship at our national Netherlands Defense Academy, and that also allows me, because I can confirm what Virginia says, to have an freedom of research within my organization, but also for my PhD. I try to keep away from the policy discussions at the Ministry of Defense, because I find that if I get involved in that, and I've been involved a little bit in it, I cannot do independent research. So I'm trying to be, and that's hard of course, because nobody's objective, but try to take an objective look at what's going on. So a couple of things that I've already heard are very spot on, and that's why I would also urge you to keep on researching, because there is a lot of stuff going on, and you should not just because we have a stake in this as military, and we want to do stuff like for a certain way and a certain aim, but it's very important. Thanks. That we have an outside look, and I will also conclude on that with my small pitch or talk. So what we have been seeing is that AI changes the way of warfare. It's been happening in Ukraine and in Gaza. But on the other hand, that's a perspective I would like to put forward, not that much as you would think that it's been changing. Because sometimes we think that AI changes everything. But if you look at the current conflicts, especially in the Ukraine, we also see a lot of old type style of wars. There are still trenches that we've used in the First World War. Unfortunately, still chemical weapons. And there's on top of that, there's been a lot of use of drones. But the AI component, it's more than I would have expected, but not as much as we sometimes think there is. So let's put it a little bit more in balance. Still, I think that if AI technology will develop, we also will start seeing more of it in especially military decision-making processes, which is the biggest thing I think we should look at. The targeting, it's not going as fast as I imagined. Military decision-making is, and I also see the over-reliance on data and decisions that are put forward by a machine. And I always try to trigger my colleagues on it. Okay, but why do you rely on this? Why do you trust this? Have you verified it? Why are you just expecting that this is the right decision? You don't know how it's being made. So we are looking at integrating AI in our processes and operations, and responsible AI, that's also in our data strategy, because I'm talking from Netherlands perspective, it's one of the key components. But when you start discussing about responsible AI and how are you going to implement that, and how would you control or supervise your military AI systems, we often see that they tend to focus on technical solutions, building in a kill switch, geofencing systems. And if you look at the complexity of operations, military operations in the field, that's not always feasible due to electronic warfare, due to lack of communications. So that over-reliance on technical initiatives or interventions, I think that we should not rely on that too much. And you also see that they're starting to look at man-machine interactions. I already heard it also from other speakers. Because yes, a person is always responsible for the decisions and deployment of an AI system. But you cannot think that they can intervene always at the right moment, because it's an autonomous systems. Inherently, the human is not directly at ongoing control in the loop. So I always also think that is not the main avenue we should take. So I have proposed a more holistic approach. And that also includes governance principles in a framework to be able to monitor and verify the black box that is AI, because it's an autonomous system of its own, but also to make sure that you always can account for the actions that has been taken by that system, because that's, I think, is one of the main crucial elements here. So, and if you regard an AI system as a black box, the military operator does not need extensive knowledge of the system. Because I also hear my colleagues or researchers say, but then we need explainable AI. The military operator, who is trained for something completely different, needs to know how the system works, needs to have technical knowledge to know exactly what that system does. Well, that's not going to happen. That's not what they're trained for. That's not the skill level or the technical knowledge that they have. So I think you should approach it from a black box perspective. You should make a design a process around it that monitor and verify the outcomes of an AI system. Sorry, I have a really bad cold. And therefore have a feedback loop that if something unintended happens, or the outcomes are not that what you have expected, that there's a feedback loop that you go back to the design of the system before you deploy it and adjust it. The open question is that I'm currently researching, and that I also would like to discuss in this workshop, is who reviews those feedback processes and the whole system? Because I don't think the military by itself should audit its own processes and its own systems. But there's also not an institution or a governance level that currently does that. And we have something like an Article 36 weapon review process in which you check the means and methods of warfare. That's also a military and state-driven process. So I'm really starting to think about who then should audit the feedback processes or the monitoring processes of a military AI system. So in order to account for its actions, and I would like to leave it at that.
So we're going to just do a little slide.
Megan first. Yeah.
Megan is, I'm going to get Megan on full screen in a moment. You'll bear with us. So Megan is here, and let me see if I can make you the thing. Yes. No, she's gonna screen share just a little.
we better go sit in the other side.
Yeah, if you like. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do
It gives us no one sees slides and the outputs.
that. I'll stop sharing and one moment. Cancel. Share. I'll stop sharing. Stop share, and then I think Megan can now be the prime. Megan, if you want to just start talk, yeah, I think you should be able to speak to us. I'll make sure the audio is
Perfect.
yeah.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much to all the panelists. I think it's been incredibly enriching already to hear everything you're working on. And I really hope that this is the beginning of working with all of you, because it really seems like we're working on a lot of the same things. I appreciate hearing from everyone. And thank you for having me. So I work for 𝗪𝗿𝗄𝗧, which is an NGO based in the UK. We monitor, assess, and archive allegations of civilian harm in various conflicts. We use open source only, so we try to kind of understand the way that civilians themselves talking about harm that they're experiencing. And I'll actually just share my screen for a moment just to show you how we work on our website. Let me just, 1 second. There we go. So the way that we work, sorry, this is not working. The way that we work is that we have this online archive. So we basically look only at the way the civilians themselves report their harm. And then we try to gather everything in one place to make it easier for those who are seeking accountability and pushing for change to come into our website. And so we have this massive archive on our website that has an overview of all the different conflicts we look at. We look at 12 different conflicts at the moment, possibly expanding to 13th with the Caribbean strikes, but let's see what happens there. And then the way that we document this, that is that every incident, so every deployment of a weaponry that harms civilians has its own tile on the website. And so if you go down, you can kind of choose the conflict you want to focus on. And so if you're doing Israel and Gaza, for instance, you would go on to this, and it would have an overview of the trends that we're seeing. So we're looking both at individual allegations of harm, but also the trends that are emerging. And the way that we work is that every day we monitor all the allegations of harm that are emerging, but it takes us longer to research and to kind of do the full review of those incidents. As you can see here, there's quite a big gap between the 15,000 incidents we've monitored and then the ones we've actually published on our website. And so you can see we're quite far behind because just the intensity of airstrikes has been so far beyond anything we've seen before. And then you can go down and you can kind of delve into individual allegations of harm. And so if you're looking to understand what happened in this incident, for instance, you would click onto this. And what we do is we have overall like the summary of what's happened and the testimonies from family members and kind of giving a very full understanding of who exactly was harmed and how. And so it's often testimonies from the families on Facebook or Telegram kind of going through what's happened. And we also do a geolocation. So you can see here, you can kind of see the exact location of where this airstrike has happened. And so I'll go down and show a bit more about how we do that. And then we provide this overview where we have information about who was responsible, who was harmed, what was the cause of harm, what kind of ammunition was used, and what's the demographic distribution of those who were injured as well. And then if you go down, you can kind of understand more about all the named victims. So there's only one here because the others weren't named. And again, the geolocation goes into a lot of detail about how we've done this process, kind of showing the way that we've used different photos to piece together exactly where it took place. And this often points us to which belligerent was responsible because we know who was operating in certain areas. So that's the kind of the method we use here. And then finally, at the end, we have the military statements on what happened. So we're trying to kind of give space for all the different stories, even where some are more based in truth than others, we still give that space for both stories. And then we have media from all the sources, which is filtered for gossip because it's often so graphic, but kind of providing like a very easy access to all the different allegations of harm that we see across various conflicts. And then we've also archived all the sources. So often we see in some conflict zones that sources have put up and then within an hour are taken back down. And so we scrape everything and we save it to a website as an archive. So everything is kind of saved here. And that's just to show our methodology a little bit. So I'll stop sharing again. And when it comes to our casualty recording, we don't distinguish between harm that was caused by AI supported systems and those that weren't. Oh, I just got a notification. Can you all still see me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
We see you fine.
Perfect. So we don't look so much at the distinction between whether harm was caused by AI support systems or not, but we do kind of have engagements with militaries to understand both the specific risks that are coming from AI supported systems, but also the challenges that are causing harm at the moment and how those are going to be emphasized and kind of entrenched by the use of AI. And I think maybe it's important to place into the context of my policy work, where I focus on building international norms, mostly on AI, but also on the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. And then I also work with nations like the US, the UK, and the Dutch in particular, and trying to kind of review their approaches in policy and practice to mitigating harm to civilians. And so that's kind of my main focus. And I think what I'm seeing in my work with militaries and with governments is that the reason they're focusing on AI, kind of at the scale that we're seeing and with the desperation that we're seeing at the moment, is because it's kind of seen in this context of preparing for large-scale combat operations. So if you're talking to Europeans, they're often talking about Russia, and if you're talking to Americans, they're talking about China. And I think this is adding a huge amount of pressure and a feeling of the need to kind of keep up with adversaries. And so that's part of the reason we're seeing this huge focus on the need for AI. Also, just in terms of the amount of funding that's being given to militaries right now to kind of be able to keep, and that being used in a very quick and kind of in some cases, I would say, reckless way of trying to kind of buy the newest technologies and showing how different militaries are using these new systems. And so there's very little thinking about the long-term or even the short-term effect that'll have on civilians who are caught in those war zones. And today, over the next 5 minutes, I just want to go over some like the two key challenges that we kind of deal with when it comes to working with militaries in this, or engaging with militaries in this. And the first one is that really what we're seeing is there's a real lack of training material for AI predictive models on how to do civilian harm mitigation well. So even though a lot of states, especially the US and the Netherlands, have done a lot to improve civilian harm mitigation from their own military effects, in reality, there's no country that really knows how to fully track or mitigate harm to civilians. And so it's very hard to imagine how, like, I think it was, I don't remember who was saying it, but someone was saying before, like, it's a difficult thing to assume that AI will be able to kind of find solutions to things we haven't been able to do before. And it's true both when it comes to states kind of documenting harm that has occurred, which often states don't know how to do, but also when it comes to getting states to kind of document the scenarios in which harm could have happened, but they mitigate it well. And so there's really no one, as far as I know, who's gathering that information in order to feed it into like an AI learning model. And so it's difficult to understand how that's going to be done. And I think often when I talk to militaries about this, they'll often say that they do synthetic scenarios to kind of create this understanding of how civilians might be engaging with militaries in conflict zones. But I also think that there is a real honesty and a frankness in those militaries that those synthetic scenarios don't really work to fully document the way that civilians act and behave in different ways in conflict zones. So I think there's gaps even now in the way that states are using like war games and other synthetic scenarios, much less at the speed and scale we would see for AI models. And the other kind of key challenge that I deal with a lot is understanding, and I think this is the majority of my work at the moment, is understanding the way that the gaps and biases that are leading to the most civilian harm at the moment in current warfare are also the ones that are most likely to be entrenched and kind of amplified by the use of AI. And that's true when it comes to confirmation bias, which I think is very linked to automation bias. And I think, like Nitin, like you were saying before, with the 972 articles kind of showing Lavender system and the way in which there's this assumption that the people you're seeing on the screen, if they are male, that they are combatants, and people having about 20 seconds to approve a target. And so there is this huge pressure to kind of just automate the process and to trust automation as well from the AI systems. And that in particular, I think we've seen in Gaza has led to a level of harm that we've never seen before. And it's been very difficult to kind of keep up with what's happening. A second challenge is a reliance on visual-only material to understand civilian harm. So a lot of militaries at the moment, the way that they understand whether civilians have been harmed by their own military action is that they use drone footage or footage from their aircrafts from very far away from where it's hit. And so when you're operating in an urban environment where often there's a lot of rubble and it's very difficult to understand who's buried in that rubble, it's very difficult to really use that to understand the true impact on civilians from military operations. And so really what we suggest as best practice is engaging more with those on the ground, whether it's through the information that they're uploading to Facebook or Twitter, or actually going to those scenarios, like to the scene where you can, to understand and speak to the civilians who've been affected. And again, it's very difficult to see how AI would be able to kind of engage with civilians who are affected in the same way. So I think there's a huge risk in that being amplified as like the way to understand civilian harm, which we know right now is not effective. And the third really big challenge is cultural misunderstandings, which again, I think we've seen already lead to such significant civilian harm. And I'm thinking in particular of a Dutch airstrike on a Iraqi town called 𝗪𝗂𝗂 in 2015, which kind of led to our entire process with the Dutch military. And that was based on an assumption that if you did the airstrike at night, there would be fewer civilian casualties because the area that they were striking, they thought was a residential area, or sorry, an industrial area. And so people wouldn't be sleeping there. But actually in Iraq, there isn't the same distinction between like whether it's industrial or residential. And so when they took out this 𝗣𝗵 factory, it took out also part of the town. And actually because people weren't like going home at night, but were sleeping in that area, it led to about 80 civilian casualties as well. And so that kind of misunderstanding of how to kind of understand local communities and how to understand the patterns of life that are happening in those, both from combatants, but also civilians, is a huge risk of being amplified by AI systems that are developed not with those countries in mind, or those societies in mind, but with a very Western-centric approach, I would say. And I think the final risk that we're seeing is overall less focused specifically on AI, but more just like civilian harm mitigation as a whole, is the way that militaries are now looking at large-scale combat operations and saying, like, we have to be so fast and we have to be able to produce targets and react to those at such speed that this entire understanding of civilian harm mitigation is a thing of the past and like very much something that kind of belongs in the war on terror territory. It's not something we can kind of bring forward. And so that's a huge part of my work at the moment. It's just trying to kind of challenge that way of thinking about what this means and like also thinking about the operational and tactical importance of understanding and recognizing and responding to civilian harm as well. And so my work at the moment, and what I hope to hear more about from all of you and talk to you more about in the workshop part of this as well, is both these risks that are coming specifically from AI systems, but also the ways in which they're going to be engaging with some of these gaps and biases that we're already seeing and amplify those as well. And my final note before I'll end is just to say, I think one of the very tangible things that we're recommending at the moment is for states to do like an AI civilian harm mitigation baseline review to understand what are the gaps that are going to be amplified in their current systems. Also, what are the good practices that they have? There might be certain countries that have developed quite a lot on this and have thought a lot about how they're going to mitigate harm to civilians from AI systems. And so just having like a review within certain nations to understand the good practices and the gaps would be incredibly helpful. I think a really good step for most nations. And I think I'll end it there for now, but I really look forward to kind of engaging more with you and hearing more what you have to say and to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. We're going to switch to our last speaker, who will just come to the podium, and I'll just bring his slides up and screen share them. So just a moment.
Yes, please.
Yes, he does. So you can stay there. Yes, that's all good. No, I will give you this thing. Yes. Rotate view, full screen mode, and then I'm gonna screen share here. Thanks for being patient with us. We'll just, oh, here we go. There, you should be able to see, whoops, now what happened? I have to like do another thing to move this window. Ah, crap. I thought I did a screen share, but it's, let me try again. So I'm trying to do a screen share. Sure. Yes, I believe this is working now. I'll just make that full screen. Yeah, go ahead, Rainer, and we can keep you on this. Yeah, you can present from here so she can see you as well, or how cool. And then
can I use this?
The clicker, the clicker is not connected, but I think you can just go like,
Put it here. Okay, you
can,
left and right, yeah, perfect.
What is happening?
That is the video.
It's blacked out.
It's blacked out.
You just move this a little bit to the right. I think it's fine.
Okay.
So, yeah, just on the side of the screen. Oh, yeah, perfect.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah, that should work.
That should work. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Are we good?
Perfect. Yeah.
I mean, I can also make this. Whoops. I can also just. Well, yeah.
No, I think that's
I think that's fine. Okay. And you can just press this button to move forward, I think.
It was to, yeah, focus slide.
Full screen. And then.
Full screen, yeah, right.
And now.
That did not work. I think you stop sharing or share the screen instead. Did you?
I am sharing the screen.
No, you shared the window.
Sharing the window. Oh, that's why. Okay. Guess one more second if I can find my share option. Share. Is it? You want me to share the screen and not the window?
Yes.
But then we're sharing the whole like.
Yeah, but that's fine. That's because then you do that full screen thing.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. And now full screen. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. View full screen.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay. And I'm assuming you are seeing everything now, so we can. Yes. Okay. Finally.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Well, thanks for organizing this workshop. I will conclude the row of speakers now. I chose the title AI as a Moral Red Herring, Technically Deconstructing AI-Based Targeted Killing as Actual Genocide Enabler. My name is Rainer 𝗍𝗃. I'm a researcher at the 𝗣𝗃𝗶𝗰 Institute for the Network Society in Berlin. And I'm in the research group Technology, Power, and Domination. It's an interdisciplinary working group. And I have a background in computer science and philosophy. I will now try to concretize and contextualize the very interesting talks and insights that have already been presented with the concrete example of lavender and gospel. I think we're all more or less aware of those, but I want to highlight specific factors in those systems to then draw conclusions regarding, let's say, reflection and policy. Then I will take some specific insights and takeaways and conclude with an interpretation of the system. So, as we've heard, those kind of AI-based target selection systems, specifically lavender and gospel, are two of those systems used by the IDF at the genocide in Gaza. Especially gospel is used for classifying and processing buildings, while lavender is used to do the kind of target selection on humans. And the 𝗪𝗲𝗃 part of the system then does the timing of then use the target selection to actually like start the bombing or the drone attacks. The base of this system is the totally entirely dataized Gaza Strip, from payment information to mobile communication data, but also mobile location data. It's expected right now that the data amounts to more than 13 petabytes saved and processed by, for example, by the project Nimbus, especially Amazon and Google for storage, but also then the AI capabilities from Google and Microsoft to then do like the magic on it. The integration is done by Palantir, as we've heard, and especially interesting that, for example, Microsoft has shared personal resources where people are working for Microsoft and for the unit 8200 within the IDF. So you have this kind of working together to develop such systems. So the idea of lavender is that each person in the Gaza Strip gets a score, sometimes called the militant score, sometimes called the Hamas score. And the score, the calculation of the score can be adjusted live. And together with this, the lavender system allows for the probable civilian casualties when one of those targets, like scored targets, are then actually attacked, it's probably because the concrete background and situation is always different. However, if you have complete data fight strip, you know how many people are where, so then you can somehow have this kind of probability as part of the system. And we know with junior targets, which is targets with a rather low, with a lower militant score, around 15 civilian casualties are okay. And with senior targets, hundreds, the sources said hundreds of civilian casualties are okay. So those are people then with a militant score higher up. So that's basically the situation. And once the threshold is defined, then you can kind of attack every person with a militant score higher than the threshold. And the timing is then done with a 𝗪𝗲𝗍 system where people are attacked at night when they're at home, and not at daytime when they're somewhere else. So this is like really briefly outlining the system. So now some interpretations and some additional information. First, we've already heard it, for each of the selected targets, we have a 20-second of evaluation. The evaluation, due to the speed of the target creation, the practice of using GPS coordinates for the targets has been replaced with the practice of using cell phone triangulation. Very steady for timing, I said this, and especially for junior targets, because there are like many of those, it is part of the practice to use cheaper bombs for attacking those. So now some interpretation of this, and I try to keep it really brief. The first thing is, if you talk about the militant score, that's kind of more telling, but sometimes some of the whistleblowers and interviewees within the IDF call it also the Hamas score. So the first question is this like a matter of speaking differently, or is this like a confusion which is somehow reflected in the system? As we know, Hamas is the political entity governing the Gaza Strip. So does it mean like attacking, let's say, the head of the health ministry, who's of course also Hamas in this area, or is it specifically talking about the Al-Qassam brigades, which are the militant arm? So this is kind of the question reflecting on what does the score actually mean. The next question is, what is the threshold? None of the people interviewed in the articles like AP News and 972 and Local Call, the journalistic outlets investigatively creating the foundation of what I'm talking about. The threshold, it was pretty unclear. Like if you have this score, like why would you choose 75 or why would you choose 60? It seems like a arbitrary decision. Then the next question was, what kind of correlation is being used, since the target scores are being calculated by known targets, and then using their movements, their communication patterns, their payment patterns, and then finding correlations in all the other data. And if it's a little bit like the signature strikes in Waziristan by the US at that time, the drone strikes. So what are the correlations? This is where the AI part comes into place. So if it's more similar to the targets that are known, then it scores higher, but it's not entirely clear which one. Then even if we take those kind of definitions of targets by kind of the internal military reflection, there was an internal evaluation that 10% of the targets found were already wrong. So even given all those definitions, which I think are highly questionable, even then 10% of the targets are wrong. Next thing, if we look into the switch from GPS to cell triangulation data, GPS has a distance failure, a possible failure of several meters. Cell triangulation is hundreds of meters. So you target the systems based on a very clear, or let's say a targeted approach using those AI tools, and then you use like a concrete geo-targeting mechanism which has a failure of several hundred meters. Then something that the interviewees also mentioned, well, if you use cheaper bombs for the junior targets, those cheaper bombs to unfold any kind of effective result, that they tend to have higher explosive potential. So you calculate the lower possible civilian casualty rate, and then what's actually used is bombs that are cheaper and have a higher radius, which is not reflected in the calculation of the civilian risk at the beginning. And that's why counteracting the whole calculation beforehand. But this is like strategically how this process works. This is the design of it. One of the sources said, well, using this kind of method like Lavender is actually emphasis. It's a nice way of putting it. The emphasis is on quantity and not on quality. Then let's come to 4 insights and takeaways. Usually when we talk about AI, the question is about responsibility and diffusion within the complexity of the black box system of the AI. This is only a side issue here in this concrete case. Focusing on this kind of issue in the case of Lavender, I think is smokescreen. The characteristics of the whole system is known because especially in Gaza, we have a situation of total awareness of the area. So this is kind of continuously using this means the responsibility just moves up one level higher to those who decide to use it. Second thing is, the main problem here is the actual configuration. All the results are somehow coded, hard-coded into, not hard-coded, but they're coded into the system. So there's no wondering what the black box does, but you see the motivations in the configuration of the system. So you can say, you can even see the 𝗣𝗪 doctrine within the system's configuration. The results that are happening are the desired results. Then third one, the threshold life adjustment allows for new ways of using the system. Several sources said if at some certain days there are still some bombers ready, but they have bombed all the targets, they just lower the threshold so much that the more targets come out of the system that match the bombs that are still available at that day. So that you lower them and then you continue bombing until you run out of bombs, and you further lower the threshold as much until you're out of bombs. If you think about what we've heard before with distinction, precaution, and proportionality, well, draw your own conclusions. And fourth, the term targeted killing is totally misleading. I hope that was kind of the claim of my talk. The complete system is like a dumb bomb, and we should also stop talking of autonomous systems in the same way of self-learning, self-driving. If we want to, we should talk about automated driving or continuous reconfiguration to not like help sugar paint. So the conclusion, the civilian casualties are actually a desired function, and such systems, I would say, consider itself war crime and terror, and the target selection is somehow a moral red herring, internal and external, saying we target specific people, but if you look at the system in whole, it is to explain internally and externally. I would consider this a red herring. And I want to conclude with a citation from one of the sources within the IDF talking about the system. If they would tell the whole world that the militant officers on the 10th floor are not important as a target, but as its existence is a justification to bring down the entire high-rise with the aim of pressuring civilian families who live in it in order to put pressure on terrorist organizations, this would itself be seen as terrorism, so they don't say it. And I think this nicely captures kind of what the aim of using this kind of extensive system actually is, and we should treat it at this. And as a last comment, the policy relevance here is we don't need to wait for actual harm. Just analyzing the configuration of the system already tells you what would happen. And so I would say this is where like policy and regulation and the discussion has to start. Those systems in action, it's already too late. I leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay. just want to invite the panelists back on stage and we can have a nice conversation. Yes, shall we do that? Actually, we are running late, so yes, let's have a coffee break. Thank you for saying it, Virginia. We have a coffee break, we come back. So let's take 10 minutes for everyone to also have a bio break. But thank you, Rehan. And all the panelists. Yes. I'm just going to make sure our people online are still with us, and let me try to. So online folks, if you just heard us, we will just take a 10-minute break. Stop. I'm just going to stop share. Stop share. There we go. So thank you, Diego, Harris, and Megan. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
All of those systems are to show like to the outside world if people want small arm and stuff.
Pause. Zoom. Yes. So we are now back in business. We've had a fantastic. Oh my gosh, there was so much. I couldn't keep up with all the amazing things you guys were talking about in our notes. I would just like to open it up to our panelists to just respond to what you heard from each other, and open up a couple of questions, and then we'll bring more questions in from myself and Peter as well as our audience here, and we'll keep this a very open format. So would anyone like to perhaps respond to what you heard, anything that surprised you, anything that were key insights that we should be thinking further about as part of our own research agenda? Start with that.
Maybe if I can just comment, I particularly like the title of Reiner's talk, because that I think is in many cases what we are doing. We are using something called AI as a smokescreen, an excuse, or whatever for what's happening. In this case, like I told you, it seems that what the Israeli military are doing is a waste of AI. They don't really need AI if they just want to bomb whoever, as long as they have bombs available that day. And then it becomes an excuse both for them, because then you can justify yourself, AI determined that this was the target, but also for the outside. And I think that in many of the cases in which we are talking about AI uses in concrete cases, is not so much what the AI system can do. Like you say, those drones, they might have a little bit of AI, but mostly they are mechanical pieces of iron and plastic and the bombs. And the AI, it's becoming a kind of, I would say, an excuse for a lot of what's happening, a justification for what's happening, and also at the end of the day, washing down the responsibility for the strategic choice. Someone is buying those things. There are decisions at country level. We talk about the state-based wars, not the role. There are decisions at government level, at international level, at the defense ministry level to buy this type of systems. That's where it starts. Then there are decisions about using them. Even if you have autonomous weapons, no autonomous weapons wakes up in the morning and decides, let me go up and start killing people around. So we are using a lot of the discussion about AI to somehow limit or take away the focus from where the decisions and the questions should be made. So I particularly liked your title because it really points it out.
So I wanted to just press on that, if I may, because I kind of see two viewpoints. They're not in opposition, but they're just two viewpoints on this from our panelists. One, as Virginia, you started out to say, is that this is still conventional warfare. AI is just a sort of like a proxy to human decision-making and harms, and we need to actually regulate warfare and the other and the role of big tech and so on. Maybe I'm simplifying, but maybe that's one viewpoint.
Sure.
The secondary viewpoint, or a different viewpoint, maybe a nuanced viewpoint that I've been hearing from Taylor and also Martine and others is that there's something fundamentally different about the way AI, even if it is being used in a smaller theater of operation in terms of the human-machine interactions, new kinds of accountability, auditability, obscure the way it's obscuring things and amplifying harm, and what Megan also brought up in terms of how we can track that harm. So is there something new as well that we should be thinking about that will only get worsened and amplified as Palantir and other companies embed these systems much more widely in all military infrastructures? That is what concerns me even more, I think, because my role as an AI research scientist, if I talk about responsible AI in all kinds of contexts, but not here, how should we be talking about it here? And is there something fundamentally different emerging here? So I just want to have us navigate between those sets of views.
Yeah, I very much agree with Virginia in that usually it's not the AI or the algorithm itself that's bringing about the result. It's the human socio-technical practices. But there is a layer that is changed by AI. So I work on the counterterrorism context. And many of the developments, the legal developments there precede AI. So going to the individuation of war, so targeting individuals based on inferences rather than what you know, so on probabilities, that was all already happening. But what AI does is that it takes the logics that practice is based on, and those used to be spelled out in military doctrine, and it makes them more insidious, because if they are implicit in the way that data sets are put together, in the types of algorithms used, in the types of interfaces designed, then you can remove that logic from the doctrine, but it's still there in the military infrastructure. But it's a lot harder to challenge or move away from, because it's now built in.
But I would like to profoundly disagree that AI does that. AI doesn't choose the algorithms. AI doesn't choose So it's again, we are using AI as an excuse for our own responsibility. AI does this, AI doesn't do nothing. There is not the AI going around doing anything. And the algorithms are chosen by us. The data sets are chosen by us. Which data sets? It starts by counterterrorism. Defining what is the terrorist is already a choice that we make. I'm Portuguese. When I was growing up, I was hearing and understanding who were the terrorists, which all of you else in the world were calling the freedom fighters in the colonial wars in Europe. So the definition of a terrorist starts already by being a very contextualized and very specific for one side of the story. There is always more sides, and the way that we put AI together, and the data sets that we put there will shape the story exactly in the way that we want. The more we talk about AI doing this or AI doing that, we are avoiding the discussion that we, people, organizations, countries, agencies, whatever, are making those choices. AI is the medium, is not the actor. The actor. Thank you.
But that's what I was meaning to convey. So,
So I guess the question is, sorry.
I'll just wait for this drill to finish, maybe. But on that topic, perhaps on the meaning of words and so on, the term itself, AI, does convey intelligence, right? That is part of the term AI. If the idea is not to convey something that is intelligent, then perhaps that's a bad term. Right? But also, on the other side, perhaps it's a very well-chosen term if the idea is to indeed diffuse accountability and so muddy the waters, let's say.
I don't think that original.
You can't answer every comment. 5 minutes intervention, please. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think this term, or do you want to? Otherwise, I just I think this is the conceptual implications are really, I mean, an artificial lake is a lake, an artificial flower is not a flower. So there are certain, I just speak louder. And that's why I would also be careful with terms like co-creating together with algorithms. As a computer science, I would say, no, there's co-creation is that this view for me would be too STSy. It's kind of taking, like, we're kind of self-mutilating the responsibility aspect in it. And so I think the context, I really like the more general views on this panel, the more abstract descriptions, because we see, I learned that military actors are specifically actors who want to really control all of their technology. It's much less so. I mean, if you get a bad recommendation in Netflix because the AI model like recommended you like a movie which doesn't match your preferences, you have a bad evening, but nothing bad happens. If you're the military and you make mistakes, people die. I mean, the reason is anyway, but so the stakes are totally different. And I found it just so interesting how the use of the tools shows the actual the actual motivations. So I'm really curious, is there something specific about military AI use, knowing that AI is a statistic method? It can never be right. This like correct. This is built in. This is nothing you can remove or something. This is part of the architecture. So using statistics in military context, what does it mean? So I'd be really curious to hear if like
That's what AI is, machine learning. AI is much more than statistics.
Yeah.
So if you want to use terms correctly, you
No.
talk about machine learning.
Yeah. It's symbolic AI. I mean, yes.
Statistics has already been used in military systems and decision-making systems. So one scenario is rated higher, and you can say, okay, it's been done objectively or subjectively. The big problem is that what you refer to, if you look at military AI systems compared to other AI systems, is that the consequences are much more severe and grave when mistakes are being made. And that's why it's, I don't know if that's the reason why everybody in policy discussions or regulations walking around it, I don't know, or maybe there are a lot of stakes behind it, or it's a very uncomfortable subject to talk about. But that's the big difference, and especially when you look at the targeting process, that's where the pain is, or the uncomfortable.
Yeah, right.
And then also the challenge from the legal perspective, when we speak about mistakes, is that under international humanitarian law, for example, mistakes aren't unlawful. There is kind of a tolerance for mistakes.
Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, when using AI, what kinds of mistakes do we then tolerate? What kinds of mistakes are being built into these infrastructures because of the probabilistic nature of machine learning, for example? And then I would say also, to intervene a little bit in the discussion from a few moments ago, the question is then, who is making the decisions? If we accept that it is kind of the humans who are choosing these systems, who are designing these systems, who are implementing them and deploying them, we have legal assessments that typically were undertaken by commanders, by kind of forward deployed legal advisors. These decisions are kind of being transplanted to earlier stages, whether it be the design of the technologies or even the labeling of data sets, which is done by kind of civilian companies that are outsourcing it to the third world under extremely exploitative conditions. And that is then kind of filtering down into the decision-making processes. So that question of who then shifts, and I think I kind of agree with both perspectives that you presented, Nitin, that on the one hand, there is something distinct about AI, or rather the use of AI in this context, because of kind of the scale and the scope and the complexity, but at the same time, that is really going to be compounding existing problems. And I think this also speaks to what Megan was discussing, about there are already significant challenges with civilian harm mitigation in our conflicts. And I would say with warfighting in general, it's messy and it's imperfect, and it always has been. And kind of issues with bias in targeting, and for example, the targeting of military-aged men in certain areas, that completely predates AI. But then there are additional risks when it comes to the use of AI, about kind of systematizing these ways in a way that, as Martine pointed out, is really, really hard to contest.
Sure. Megan.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I think I was actually just gonna say exactly that. I think in so many ways, a lot of what we're seeing is the same challenges that have always been there. I think there's maybe like a risk of us kind of talking about this dichotomy between like safe humans and dangerous AI, where actually like the biases that are being sped up, the difference really for me is the speed and the scale of the same biases that we're seeing. So whether it comes to like to the datafication of war, right? Like trying to kind of minimize communities into data we can measure. That's happened long before the use of AI, like where we're trying to kind of make civilians and combatants and entire communities into these like very simple datafication structures so we can kind of implement systems. I think that's the same challenge we're seeing now, but just at a much bigger speed. And the same with like cultural misunderstandings or gender-based violence against men. Like I think Taylor, you were just saying about like the fact that men are now being targeted because of their gender. Like it's the same challenge we've seen before, where male like men within the military age are often targeted in warfare. And the same, I think, when it comes to intent, like the intent that we're seeing in terms of how civilians are being treated and targeted in certain conflicts is the same we saw before, but now there's so much more speed to it that the risks are so much more obvious and so much more visible, I think. And I do also think, I think, Martine, maybe I misunderstood, but I think what you were saying about like the black box in terms of it's often so difficult to understand what's being done. And it's not because, like, I think there is, there is the ability to put into that black box, like the factors to determine something based on. And if there was a willingness to engage with the black box and understand what is happening in the decision making, then that would be a different case. But again, I think it goes back to intent that there are certain militaries who are willing to have this black box and kind of willing to just act on results from an algorithm we don't fully understand because we're not willing to engage with that understanding of how it works. And the third challenge I would just mention really quickly as well is the siloing of different challenges, where AI is seen as one challenge and civilian harm mitigation is seen as another. As I think what we're seeing in some militaries is trying to kind of engage with militaries about what does civilian harm mitigation look like in the use of AI in a large-scale combat operation, for instance. And they'll say, well, no, our AI team is like not involved because this is about civilian harm mitigation. And I think there's this massive challenge in trying to break down the silo and say, well, if you're talking about civilian harm mitigation truly, you have to design that as part of AI systems from the very beginning of like thinking about what is it you're trying to do with the AI system, what information are you putting into it, what is your intent in terms of how you're going to view the data. And instead we're seeing the siloing of the different sectors, which I think is a real risk as well.
So I wanted to just point out the issue, like what is different about the use of AI in warfare, and besides speed and scale, which obviously are creating certain kinds of harms. Maybe one of those differences, I think, which Taylor was pointing out, was the human-machine interaction. We see this in air traffic control. It's an area that I've also examined, where you had kind of manual systems where there was certain kind of ways that practices that emerge in air traffic control that provided safety in terms of how air flights were monitored and so on. As we digitize these systems and the overlaps in digitization created other kinds of risks in terms of distributed cognition, awareness of these things. And I wonder in these very highly networked systems that are each having their own sets of unpredictability and probabilistic gaps, and then we combine them into a theater of operation with certain kinds of human-machine interactions that are now newer than they used to be, whether chains of accountability get broken, whether there's different ways that these things then operate. So my concern is coming from that angle, perhaps, rather than purely from its scale and speed of operation. This is one thing I wanted to sort of bring to bear, but maybe the other thing I wanted to bring to bear is around policy, regulation, governance, controls. Are there any fundamentally new things that we have to be talking about? Or should we simply strengthen the policy regulatory mechanisms we have today? For example, the AI Act excludes and exempts all use of AI in surveillance military context, let alone export of these technologies in other theaters. So those are very concerning for many civil rights groups, including myself. So should we be thinking about this new Wild West in a different way, or should we simply be strengthening systems we already?
Did you want to use a race? No, otherwise yeah, okay. Yeah, really it's interesting points. I would like to say the speed and scale aspect. I would like to highlight the other side of speed and scale, because you're kind of, if you reduce the time between uses or between results, you're also reducing the time for contestation. So this is, I think this is something really to, like, if you look at the informal organization, sometimes in processes, mistakes are made, but then they are taken care of by people because there's enough time to take care of them, which now there is not anymore. So I think this is one aspect. The next aspect is, especially with those data-driven systems. So it's not the data processing itself, but the data necessary is, I think this creates a new kind of dynamic. If we're just thinking about Palantir making a new case for integrating those different sources, and then 20 years forward, Palantir is the data provider for most of the militaries on this planet. Isn't that a bit weird? So, right, I mean, probably it's not most of but let's say the Western ones, and then considering the Cloud Act from 2018. So there is a certain dynamic that lies not in the processing, but in the data necessary. And so I think this is something I'd like to also ask for you, is that a different, does it require different policy angles? And the last thing is, I would like to, we always talk about the systems that have risks. It always sounds like they mostly work fine, but sometimes they go wrong, but we can fix it in the future, it will work. If we take the statistics nature, they are inherently risky. So maybe if we talk about mistakes, maybe it's not the concrete case where this is a mistake. Maybe the mistake is already using such system. And then, you know, the responsibility questions would change. I suppose that's a question. So I'd like to pose this to you.
I wanted to pick up on the thing you said about the aviation industry. That's what inspired my project. Because what you see there is that there's regulations about the use of the technologies, like how much human control is necessary. But then private companies develop the technologies, they work in a certain way, and then that quietly shapes what humans can and cannot do in practice. And you see that happening as well with AI DSS in the military. So I kept asking this question, like, using the aviation technology, and the answer I would get from many lawyers was, well, then the state simply has to regulate the private industry, so I don't see a problem. That loses all the nuance of how algorithmic or technology shape human decision making and the other way around, and that's what it's part.
And then in air traffic, you have very specific standards, protocols, practices that are industry-wide, but we don't necessarily have any transparency about the kind of practice protocols in the military conduct of use of this technology. So that's maybe one of the things we need to study.
And IHL has very vague, contextual, value-laden concept.
Two things. One on the issue of scale and speed. I don't think scale is the point at all. Atomic weapon is a scale much bigger than AI. The point is distribution, the distributivity of the system. The small drones that you can create a swarm of a million drones, which needs to be addressed in a completely different way than not to address the regulation of the one big atomic bomb that would destroy half of the planet. So I don't think scale is the issue. And I see some parallels with the way that we will need in a policy-wise to address this distributivity or networked aspect of war as what we have to do in education. In education, at this moment, we are struggling with the knowledge generation is not anymore the thing that was unique of the students that we could then evaluate. But knowledge generation is the cheap part of the whole thing. You can generate every kind of knowledge, and then we need to rethink our systems of evaluation. The same in the military. It's not anymore the control or the policies about how we are going to look at this big monolithic type of systems, but is much more about how we address this capability of anyone and everyone to get their drone involved in the issue. And then we have what happened recently, that we send a jet, how you call those things? The F-35 or whatever, which costs a few millions to put on the air, to go shoot down drones of 5,000 euros cost. So I think it's much more about, it's a much more distributed network than I believe, and that the policies that are in place at national and international level are much more based on this idea that we have this very big and very regulated ways of using the scale. Another point I want to make is on the AI Act. The AI Act cannot do anything else than what it does. The European Union is created exactly around the premise that we are not talking about military issues at the level at the European Union. So the AI Act could not include, by definition of how the European Union is made, could not include any military aspects per se, because that is something which in the agreement for the creation of the European Union were left at national level. They might change it, but the way that it stood up, it could not talk about by definition. It's not by choice, but it's just kind of cannot be that, because the European Union doesn't rule or determine anything about the military.
Yeah. So the question would become, what are the other mechanisms that sit with that arms conventions, treaties? And
you need to look at the NATO, you need to look at national defense things, but not the European Union. They are not.
And they're trying to do it at the UN level, but that's going to go on for 10 years. That's going on forward. So there are now a couple of countries trying to bilaterally discussing policy recommendations for something creating. So you see a movement outside of UN, but still not every country will adhere to that. And the problem with the distribution of networking capabilities also is distribution of decision making. And that's really the hard part. And what I also see is that people rely too much on AI and they start losing our critical thinking, not just within the military, but also in education and other parts. People just ask chat, because they now refer to ChatGPT as a partner to get answers, but ChatGPT, the way that's what I a bit shocking here this week is that because they're getting so much AI generated content on the internet, exactly, it actually reinforces all the things that AI already created, and then it's created, it refers to its own content again. And I think there's a use only critical thinking.
yeah, so it's like intervene in our panel discussion.
Yeah.
We haven't started, we're going to find us listening. But I don't know if there's any responses to the voting, maybe open it up for a round of questions from the audience.
I mean, I actually have a question.
I don't know where to take the drones, but the problem comes from the garage downstairs. Yeah, because when we arrived, they were installing some construction material there. Peter is looking drones.
Taylor.
So my question is about these kind of auditing processes that you mentioned, and I was really interested to hear that you think that shouldn't happen solely within the military institute. So I would just love to hear you expand more in the context of this discussion about kind of like regulation and protocols and practices, how that actually might look in practice, and who would be the actors participating in that.
Yeah, that's the open question. Yeah, but that's because I also always look at different fields and domains, like medical domains, very far in institutionalizing and auditing. But we also have the aviation. But I don't either. There's not a model you can copy one-on-one, or and I haven't found it yet. So I think that should be. For me, it's the ongoing question, a couple of years, which I would like to research, and I'd like to hear any ideas about that.
Can there be a board of civilian sort of like experts who offer the ability to audit and so forth. I don't know how it's, what are the models that one could use
Yeah.
to?
So yeah, I don't know. I have to research that because these actually are 36. Yeah. Partly, but that's also very internally focused. It's like the butcher, you say, assessing its own meat. It's yeah.
Probably one of the big problems as well is not so much the formal use of AI in the military, but what many organizations are calling the shadow use of AI, which is the individual use of chat, like you say it, for forming your own opinion or your own decision making. And that is something which is not regulated. It's just any one of us. And I suppose military are people like us. They are not different than any of us. And they will also use chat for their own decision making, for their own understanding of the world. And those are the less evident because it's not about setting the drone in the air or whatever type of thing, but it will permeate a lot of the decision forming and the understanding through this shadow AI.
I think if they are using it, maybe still now, but what I've seen in terms of IT security in really larger companies, like I don't know, like really global companies, in their corporate networks, they don't allow the use. Like technically, it's disallowed. And what they do is they start develop or like fine-tune larger models as internal models in their own internal networks. And I would be really curious if those kind of ideas have popped up in any military context so far. Because I would bet, at least in Germany, no, maybe not Germany, that already it's not allowed from the professional laptops to access this kind of services. But I also want to underline my question, like really that was not rhetorical, like what the panel thinks of the idea of a risk and a risky technology, and what's a mistake if you use something that's statistically wrong a lot of times, like where to, I don't know, maybe you didn't want to answer, or maybe you just got under the bus, but I'd be really curious about your like reflections, maybe legal, maybe philosophical. Yeah.
You have a question? Yeah, it's not now, but just for us to know that this.
There are a couple of questions online and some I'm sure here. So when we're ready, we can start to.
Better, it's in the garage. Set the drone to them.
Yeah, I thought so.
Set the drone down and shut it down.
So let's take a few questions from the audience, and maybe we can take 2 or 3 at a time, or we just take one.
It's not avoiding to answer your question.
Maybe
Make sure.
I see.
Megan, did you have a response you wanted to make before we get to the audience questions?
I do, but I'm happy to wait until we have more questions and I'll kind of summarize everything. But just to say, I can't really hear what's being said in the audience. So if someone would mind maybe just typing up like the key question, then I can come back in with my answers as well. Thank you.
Somebody can speak loudly at least. I think, did you have a question first? Yes.
I wanted to continue on the topic of the author part. It would be to understand what kind of decisions you're talking about mostly, because like are they high level or strategic ones or tactical or operationals, you know, because for me, if we're talking about real life war environment and the idea of not the military who should be reviewing this, then like, yes, who would be? And military is also the only body with the actual awareness of the context and the access to information, which is highly classified, right? And then you said that the human can be out of the loop because it's a black box. So then this audit will become the actual checks and balances in the whole system. And if this body is not military, how are we sure that it doesn't become just like this after the fact judgment with no real awareness of the situation? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it will be inevitably after the fact, but also would like to learn from it, and it doesn't mean it has to be 5 years after the fact. And it's also, while you're asking this question, I was thinking it might not also have to be like publicly available. You can also have private or internal auditing. Not everything has to be made publicly or can be made publicly after a couple of years. So these are good questions, and how you would you do that at tactical level or strategic? I really, but there is something like auditing already, so I have to take a look at that.
There is a risk that if this process is becoming too small, then it becomes more symbolic.
Yeah, that's a risk. Yeah.
Megan has her hand up. Megan, could you hear the question?
I could, thank you. And I think it was a really good question. I think from my point of view, what I would say is, I think again, it kind of goes back to the challenge of like, what are we auditing against? Like, what is the standard that we're kind of measuring effectiveness against? And I think when it comes to things like Palantir or things like even just like the way that militaries and governments are using AI in their targeting, it's hard for me when it comes to measuring their effectiveness in mitigating harm to civilians to figure out what is the standard we're measuring that against. If it's what we currently do and what we've done in past warfares that isn't quite good enough because civilians are still being harmed at a scale that's so far beyond what really is necessary in warfare. And also when they are harmed, there's very little response. And so it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about like this difficulty in understanding, even with an audit, how are you testing the model? Because there's no lessons on how to do mitigation that well. And also what are you measuring it against as a standard for how you do it well when there's really no lessons in that way. And I'm not saying the militaries don't have some practice in terms of like civilian harm mitigation. They very much do, but it's not always written down and it's not consistent across operations, I would say.
Yeah. I think the like this harm mitigation and audit idea, I think this is kind of the second step. The first step I would like to see or somehow being addressed is, especially when the military, I mean, I'm not paid by the military, but at least good point. But at least in terms of, you know, the motives, let's say, of profit-driven actors, it's quite difficult to find out how this is being then operationalized. But however, with the military, there is a certain kind of clear motive and a structure and the incense dynamics. So the first step would be to see the internal organizational reasoning of using those tools. I mean, they don't say, hopefully don't say, how about trying this and see how it works? I mean, there must be some deliberation with the strategic department, the IT department, all this. This is all documented, and they even if it's not an audit according to our standards, but there have to be it serves a purpose, and there must be internal KPIs and reasonings, especially as a military, as a public entity. So those kind of documents would be the first step. If what kind of audit you do on top, that's perfectly fine, but those documents should exist already everywhere. So the question is who has access to them, whatever, but I'd like to draw like a focus that this already should exist if they do it properly, and I really hope they do.
And most of this information is classified.
True.
Not everything, not in the Netherlands. It's
Could you repeat the question? Because I don't know if everybody heard the question online. But the information is sometimes classified.
Yeah, this sometimes is, but not always. Not with the military AI decision making or the experimental stuff or the robot processing automation that we're doing. And especially in the Netherlands, you have the 𝗣𝗃𝗶𝗰𝗵𝗀. So we have to deliver our
Publieke openness.
Yeah, public openness. So we have to deliver our documents when they're requested to anybody. It takes a long time, I know, but
like freedom of information.
Yeah, freedom of information. So everybody can request and for their own purposes or journalistic purposes. So it's much less classified than you might think.
Yeah, there's more questions. So, and we will also have a chance to get questions in from the online chat. Shall we do one there, or let's do one there if you don't mind? We'll, yes,
exactly. So
we can also ask the person to ask the question directly if they're willing to.
You want to do that, Jorgen?
Discussing that, we can go to specialists to decide.
No, so Diego is asking a question online.
Okay, can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
So my question would be to ask a bit about the possible dangers of AI in amplifying cyber attacks and DDoS and etc. This kind of war that it can be seen as virtual, but it can have real strong impacts in our everyday life everywhere, because we are so dependent on these informatic structures. Thank you.
Any remarks on that?
Yeah, I think that the main thing there is again on policy issues, because in a sense is a warfare as other types of warfare, but not on physical targets, but on digital targets. I don't think that many of the policies around are considering digital damage in the same way, and maybe from a legal perspective. I don't think it's taken in the same level as physical arms. And probably that's a discussion that needs to be taken in terms of policy. And maybe that goes back to the risk issue, because formally, risk is defined by the probability of something undesirable happening and the severity of the fact that that thing happens. These two things, it looks very mathematical, and they use that in actuarial and in insurance companies all the time. The point is that all these things are extremely subjective. And probably the fact that we are not seeing digital arms as risky or as important to regulate or to include, it's because somehow we see the severity of this damage to be much less than the physical one. But of course, then also the physical one, it's and I remember some years ago when people were all talking about these existential arms of AI that in the future is going to take over all the world, that someone said, yeah, but the existential arms for myself, if I'm wrongly profiled by AI, can be as much individually as would be for this humanity in general. So the disproportionality, and who is deciding what is the risk? Is that a national risk, a future risk, individual limiting of possibilities of someone? Those things are not really considered, and there is then some kind of decision of what is the risk and the arm of that risk that we are not taking enough into account. And I think that that applies definitely for the classification of digital harms, because those are kind of seen as not really harmful enough.
Do you have a comment? Shall we move to the next question?
I could comment on the question
Please,
directly
please.
as well. I think if we want to have an analogy, I mean, you've been referring to AI use in DDoS and all those kind of like cyber is the same as AI, right? It's this kind of, okay. Anyway, if you on the one hand have cyber weapons as Stuxnet, like the Israeli-US action against Iran and Natanz, this would be the sniper weapon directly specifically designed. Now with using AI and talking about speed and scale and all this, now we have this really huge shotgun. And I think this is really scaling those attacks with all the risks and all the like impreciseness. I think we could go into details, but I think the overall is to expect so much casual or like not implied results. I think this is the danger. So you lower the threshold of using it, you lower the focus, and you increase the speed. That's basically the dynamics we're seeing.
I wanted to pass the question to Otte, and if you could speak louder or closer.
I collected a few questions. I'll just throw them out and then respond as you wish.
Could you come to this chair if you don't mind? Just because I think Megan will hear you better.
Gladly. So maybe I'll start with Megan. I was really interested if you could comment maybe on the challenges of validating different kinds of informations that you get on the platform. I thought it was incredible, the platform that you shared, and I wasn't familiar with that. So thank you for that. But could you talk to this, in this age of misinformation and deep fakes, and sort of what challenges do you face with that? I would love to hear about that. And to the legal scholars, I was really interested in your take on the issue of proportionality. So you mentioned that this is anyway a difficult concept with vague parameters, right? Where we don't know. So the introduction of algorithmic decision-making tools, how does that sort of now mix up how we, apply IHL towards decisions for proportionality, if we accept the foundation that human judgment anyway, or we can't really create precise guidelines for that. So is this a good thing, a bad thing, or what are the challenges? And then I was really interested, maybe that you could comment on sort of like, what is the flagship AI project in the Dutch army that's now sort of I would just love to hear about that. So maybe you can give us the insider take on that. So.
That's slowly what we specify.
So maybe we start with Megan to respond to Attil's really good questions.
Yeah, I think it is a really good question. It's something we deal with quite a lot when it comes to like working with militaries, where they kind of challenge us and say like, well, how do we know it's true? And really what we do at Air Wars is we triage information. We put everything in one place so that others can understand what it's saying. And so, I mean, we do validate, we have geolocation, oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah, so
okay. We geolocate, we review our information, we do cross-referencing of the photos and the videos that we see. And so like we often find in some theaters, like in Yemen, the Houthis are very good at using old footage to kind of say like this is a new explosion. It's also very easy to kind of use various online systems, various tools to kind of say, well, no, this is an explosion from 2011. And so we also have like we have corrections on our website to kind of say like we initially posted this as a photo that showed that it was this, and actually we found out that later it was part of this past operation. But more than anything, we are an information database of all the information that's being reported. And so maybe an example that I think of as quite useful is that a lot of the information that we kind of gathered during Operation Inherent Resolve against ISIS in Iraq and Syria was information that was provided by ISIS that was seen as inherently untrustworthy information because the source of information was so biased and so untrustworthy. But really, it still had information in there that was useful for everyone, including the DoD, and understanding the harm that was kind of actually really happening. And so I think even when you have this creation of information that is no longer truthful and that is very like difficult to kind of sort through, there is still pieces of really valuable information in there. And so the job of militaries and other accountability kind of mechanisms is to review the information. But at Air Wars, very much is gathered in one place and kind of present what we have in that way. And I think that does work. Like we see with the US DoD, for instance, that 70% of the allegations they review come from Air Wars. And so there is a system of kind of like figuring out ways of doing that in a productive way, I think. But it's a good question and it's a difficult one.
Yes. Okay, a couple of points that I wanted to pick up on. So the first one on this question of risk and mistakes. And I think, going back to that. So I think what I mentioned earlier about the potential for systematizing the way that the model produces output, and I think for militaries and end users to really understand what these systems do, how they work, and the fact that that includes failures, that false positives and false negatives are how the system works. That's not a mistake. That is the function of the system. So what then happens when the kind of tolerance for mistakes absorbs that? I think this question of, is it a mistake to kind of adopt and deploy these systems in the first place is a really good one. And I think this also speaks to this point on accuracy that I mentioned, that so much stock is put in the accuracy rate of the system, which really is providing a very kind of like snapshot of how the system performed in certain conditions in training. It doesn't necessarily speak to how it's going to perform once it's deployed. And yet accuracy is held up as kind of a main factor as to whether or not these systems are appropriate and whether they fit in the purpose. But of course, they're gonna function in very different ways in very different contexts. So yeah, I think building an understanding amongst end users about what these systems do Because from a legal perspective, then if they are just treated as mistakes, then there's this huge gap and this huge scope for like additional harms to be tolerated from a legal perspective. Yeah, also very briefly on the cyber point, yeah, just to say that there's been so much legal discussion on cyber kind of in international law circles kind of predating AI. And I think the difficulties of pointing to the directness of the harm, but this point about scale, it is really important, and the potential for automation there, and also that it's not just the level of harm of each individual situation, but also cumulatively. And when you have these systems that can operate much faster, then on the whole, there's going to be significant harm. And there are many kind of complicated legal questions about then whether they can be taken cumulatively, like as an attack, for example, which is kind of this like specific legal concept under international humanitarian law. And then proportionality. So yeah, I think there are kind of two ways that I think about proportionality under international humanitarian law and military AI. First is whether the systems are kind of capable of like replicating something like a proportionality analysis, and I see kind of some computer scientists, scholars trying to work towards that. And from my perspective, I think this is like a substantively different process, that there is a huge semantic gap between if a system is kind of using numerical weights to balance something that's been taken to represent civilian harm and something that's been taken to represent military advantage. I mean, military advantage, for example, is another one of these open textured kind of subjective concepts that cannot be determined in the abstract, that can only be determined in the context of the specific conflict and the attack itself. So I think those differences are significant, but I think the second dimension of it is about the use of the technologies to support this decision making. So if you have systems that are producing kind of probabilistic output about, you know, who's a target, who's a civilian, that can then feed into proportionality assessments that are still kind of conducted by the military commanders with the support of legal advisors. But then that kind of interaction shaping how that decision making takes place and shifting those decisions towards logics of that interaction, whether that be kind of because the decision space is kind of highly accelerated, so there's kind of more tolerance for greater levels of harm within proportionality assessments, whether it's, for example, the kind of logics of using AI or like machine learning, for example, within that context itself, based on kind of statistical associations and correlations that really represent group level trends for assessments that should be individualized case-by-case assessments, or even the kind of value-based reasoning component of that, of when you're kind of seeing something like civilian harm being represented in these numerical terms, whether that over time begins to shift the way that we think about civilian harm or that militaries think about civilian harm, toward this kind of like quantified understanding, rather than really grappling with the value of human life, which is something that the IHL proportionality standard requires. So they're kind of various ways that I think those interactions then kind of shape the decision-making process when it comes to deciding, well, what's proportionate harm in this context, in the sense of, is the civilian harm excessive with respect to the military advantage? So just a couple.
I do a very brief add-on. Proportionality is also a good example of how, or IHL more general, of how softwares quietly reshape how it works. So in AP1, there is the doubt rule that formally says if in a counterinsurgency context, you don't know if you're dealing with a civilian or combatant, presume it's a civilian. Then we have softwares that say 0.7 combatant, or we have CD cutoff software. So we have software that is very good at attaching numbers to these kind of assessments, even though the law and the jurisprudence says this can never be a quantitative assessment. It always has to be a human qualitative assessment. If we build these softwares into how the targeting process works and how militaries operate, they will kind of take over, and then certain rules slowly become adapted. So.
Well, I think this is a very, I think for me, this is a very interesting point, highlighting how much do we want to use such systems? Because I've seen in a lot of cases discussing, let's say, questions of data protection law, and then seeing how, for example, large language models can't adhere to those requirements. And then the result is not, well, then we can't use them, but okay, so what kind of mitigation can we just make up to still use them, knowing that they actually don't adhere to the law? And I see the same somehow here. If you have systems that are, maybe they, let's take situations where the systems cannot make this clear distinction, then the result would be, if we apply those regulations or this kind of legal standard to say we can't use those systems, but that's not what's happening. This is so I find it interesting how much we're actually giving. Like how serious was this law anyway? If at the first time we get some kind of shiny software, we just say, I would rather use the software than adhering to the standards and the things that have been discussed for 80 years. So I don't know if is that something
Violated. It wasn't just the software. Before the software, there were already very questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can I just ask back? So would you say now using software just exemplifies the problems that were already there before?
Well, it comes back to the point I made earlier. It moves it from policy to infrastructure where you can, where it's less contested. The problem was already there.
Okay. Yeah.
I see.
Yes, there are two hands back, and there's one online question. So we'll take them together, and so we can triangulate. But I think you were first, actually. And could you speak loudly, because I'm not going to be able to bring this close to you.
Yeah, sure. Maybe a bit off topic, but 10 years ago, I saw a Black Mirror episode where the enemy was portrayed as a cockroach to increase the kill rate. And I think the military was also an episode that the kill rate was in the Second World War, it was much lower. So they used cocaine. In the Vietnam War, they started to use LSD, etc., to improve the kill rate. And now warfare is expanded to such a rate that the enemy is like a dot on a map. So it's multifaceted, changed in the last 100, 200 years. So, and we still have the old frameworks in place, like the Geneva Convention was maybe based on the face-to-face contact that soldiers had, or whatever. So, yeah, aren't the legal frameworks outdated at the moment? Shouldn't we use like a radical innovation of the frameworks? Should that be taken into account? And what I really don't like about the discussion, it is viewed as a technical problem, because it isn't. It's like people process technology in an organization that maybe it's more like a people problem than a technical problem. So that's why I don't like the probability, etc.
Yeah. Because
I totally agree about the responsibility, what Virginia said. It lies with the humans that are behind the computer, and it's not systems.
So let's. Thank you. I'm going to ask 𝗪𝗫𝗀𝗲 to ask the next question.
Yeah, interesting part. Thank you so much. My question is actually to Martine. So just kind of going back on public procurement for this sort of decision-making systems, right? So I wonder, obviously, not to put you on the spot, I wonder if you kind of have any insight into sort of needs assessment or sort of readiness assessment conducted by the military, or just any kind of good example, right? So what you find usually with, IT systems generally in government is that they are kind of vendor driven, right? So you have a situation where certain types of vendors are embedded within government. They kind of lock in, right? So it's not really, it's like, oh, we have this tool being supplied to us, we can buy it and then figure out what we want to do with it, right? So what do you think is sort of your general sense of readiness assessment? Obviously, this is usually not public in the military, right? But it's kind of frameworks exist in the first instance.
Yeah, we'll bring both these questions to the panel. I think there's one more in the chat.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us?
So Harris, do you
Harris, maybe you can just speak to us directly if you don't mind using your microphone. Are you able to ask your question, Harris, or shall we do it through the chat? Okay, let's maybe perhaps open the chat to ask the question.
Hi everyone, I was wondering over the point raised before on the artificial part of intelligence and how an artificial flower can't be a flower, but a lake can be. Using the same, I was wondering how the conversation in theater of warfare would shift once that artificial involves the sentient and developing agency rather than being stuck at the threshold of a human pressing a button at the end, after the intelligence does the 99% of the analysis and assessments. Additionally, if we zoom out, how would that look like for the military-industrial complex and translate into their workings?
Okay, I'll put that question on the screen while you answer the first two questions. So let's start with the question from you and also from Auton.
Do you want one?
Well, I can comment on you saying Black Mirror episode about it's more or less about objectifying the enemy that has been done for quite some time, because there were actually a lot of cases in which, for example, in the First World War, people were standing at both sides of the trenches and missed their shots on purpose because they didn't want to kill the people in front of them. So that's a mechanism that's been used to objectify the person that you're actually that's your enemy or your opponent. And nowadays in computer science, you can just make them indeed dots. It's nothing new, it's just a different part of it. And I agree with you on that. We always, and that's what I will also trying to convey, is we focus a lot on the technology, but there's so much more around it. And we as humans are responsible for designing the systems, but also for how we deploy them. And so there's always a responsibility towards us, and that's why I think it's really disturbing that our critical reflection and thinking is getting less and less triggered by all those AI systems.
Maybe do you want to answer first?
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked the question about discipline, whether the law is sufficient or do we need new laws? I mean, in a sense, I think both things are true. The way I view international law, it's not this set in stone set of frameworks that is this kind of inflexible framework that doesn't evolve, but it's a social construction that evolves with time and through interpretation. So I think one of the key points of my research is that kind of the human machine interaction can over time shape that interpretation. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean that existing frameworks are insufficient, but that we should be very kind of considered in how we allow the law to develop. That's not to say that we don't necessarily, that additional laws wouldn't be beneficial. And I think a function of kind of new regulation, particularly in the kind of disarmament arms control context, is we often have additional legal frameworks that really seek to kind of clarify interpretations or highlight the kind of significance of some existing norm kind of in a weapon-specific context. And we have kind of a range of international treaties for that. So I think in this context, for AI, that could also be useful, not necessarily because there is a gap, but to kind of support this process of the kind of evolution and development of the law in order to kind of ensure that it keeps pace with technology. That said, I'm not sure that law ever really does keep pace with technology. It's by nature reactive, and developments in AI happening very, very quickly. So yeah, in that sense, I think both things are true.
Yeah, I'll jump up there. Yeah, so the law always changes in response to new technologies. The first IHL was written in a time where you just had the maritime domain and the land warfare domain. We have the airplane, precision-guided missile, non-state armed conflicts, then the drone, and now we have various types of algorithmic decision-making. And each put different kinds of pressures on legal principles, and then the way they are applied in practice changes. I do agree that algorithmic decision-making puts such amount of pressure on how you're supposed to do, for example, proportionality assessments, that we would benefit from specific and concrete rules, but efforts to make those are currently, they might go somewhere, but they're quite slow and very contested given the current political climate. I'll also answer the procurement question. So with centralized procurement, that you can probably speak to that better than I can. Militaries do assess, does this fit in our current ways of working? Does it fit with our current doctrines? And there's also the Article 36 assessment of, does this fit with current principles of IHL? But what we see with Silicon Valley as a new actor in war is that they really don't like centralized procurement. Alex Karp from Palantir has called it communism. He has written a whole book on it, the Moneyball military. So what Palantir does is direct to unit marketing. So for example, in Afghanistan, they let individual military personnel try it out, and then from below, pressure to procure the system builds, and then eventually they suit the army. And so they really try to find a backdoor to circumvent all those battle procedures, because in their view, they take a long time. We have an adversary, speed is of the utmost importance. So with the entrance of Silicon Valley, you see a moving away from that type of thing, even though
they try to do that, but luckily that's one thing, that our procurement process is so robust and so much checks and balances, because it's public money, that they fail at it. I've seen them trying it a couple of times, and every time they just.
You mean in Dutch?
In the Netherlands,
yeah, in the Netherlands,
it's public, but in other contexts, for example, Ukraine, you can see a lot of informal procurement. And then I had the suggestion for the question in the back. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Elke Schwartz and 𝗪𝗿𝗃 have written on how AI kind of helps dehumanize and distance the enemy, so that they become less of a person and targeting nonsense. There's Elke Schwartz.
Oh yeah, right.
And 𝗪𝗿𝗃. They've written a lot of this stuff.
Rainer, do you want to answer that last point and
just
begin to wrap up?
Oh yeah, but some few comments.
Yeah.
I mean, the panel started with a rant that it's not a technical problem, so I think this is nothing that can be said about this panel. But I think the interesting aspect is, on the one hand, it is neither a technical thing nor is it only a people thing, because that's also too easy. What we're talking about, some of my appreciated colleagues always say, digital tools are like bureaucracy. They do what you tell it to do according to the rules, but not quite. So it is not one or the other, and it's in between.
So it's a socio-technical problem.
Exactly.
Can we agree on that?
Yeah. So that's why I don't think it makes sense to leave the technology out and say, oh, it's a social thing. People need to decide on things. No, there is a certain like guardrails of what's possible, quantification, all this, all this. Then we had this sentient question. That's a nice philosophical question, but it's all science fiction. I don't think it's necessary to spend much time on it. If you're interested, I had a fact paper on AI narratives, and this is one of the narratives which is the most misleading, and I think it's in serious topics, it's a waste of time. Then do we need laws? I just have some parallel from the ethical AI discourse. I always found it so funny when people are asking, yeah, we need ethical AI. Usually the first question should be, what ethics are you referring to? It's not like there is the ethical AI and then you're an unethical AI. So the discussion is not new. And I think in a way, we have to differentiate, do we need new laws, or are the laws just not being enforced? So this is or are they deliberately not enforced because of power relations? So this is, I'm not a big fan of all those kind of legal innovation. It's for me the same as ethical innovation. No, this is moving away. And at the end, yeah, so especially this kind of the enforcement question, I think this would be something to focus on, and what that would mean in technical systems. So at least from my point of view, this would be something to spell out, and I think in this panel would be the right people to do this. What do those abstract norms of appropriateness, no, what was it, proportionality, what does that concretely mean within those tools? I think this is a really interesting question.
And just to bring Megan back in at the end, not only do we need good technical validation and review and legal mechanisms, we also need civil society to have a role in all of this. And in terms of human rights investigations, in terms of what the ACLU did to in the US context to reduce surveillance in certain communities, I mean, civil society can be an important force to enforce certain laws that are on the books but are not being enforced. But they can also provide really important human rights investigation, like forensic architecture does in the context of Gaza and Syria and other places. So I want to emphasize that we have another set of tools that they're using AI in really interesting ways now, and data in interesting ways that, as we saw from air wars, can be quite a powerful counterforce. And can the military bodies, at least the ones who are a bit more enlightened, work with such civil society organizations to create a sort of mechanism that is more trustworthy in the long run? That's an open question. But I want to leave Megan with some closing comments as well. Megan, your microphone is off. Yes.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. I think actually most of the questions I would have said the same thing that the panel said. I think I'm really enjoying it. And I feel like I'm learning so much from all the panelists and all the questions as well. So thank you. I think the only thing I would add is about this readiness assessment that someone asked about. And I think one of the things that we've done, and I'll just share my screen again. One of the things we've done is we worked to kind of understand the ways that different militaries are or are not ready for civilian harm mitigation more broadly. So again, looking beyond AI at 𝗔𝗰𝘁 as a whole. And so we created this monitor called the Civilian Protection Monitor, where part of what we have is this overview of how ready militaries are to really do this. And so you can see here, and this is, I should say, this is first of all looking only at military's own military actions and not support for partners, which is why, for instance, the US is quite high, because their own mitigation did improve. And also the other part of that puzzle is this is only until February of this year. And so our next annual report will bring the US down quite significantly, because Trump has taken apart so many of the better things that were happening. And so this is kind of an assessment of that, like how ready are they to mitigate harm to civilians and to respond in current conflict, and especially if there is a large-scale combat operation, how would that look? And so I think you can see, like with the US, which was high up to February of this year, but now is going to go down significantly. And the UK being uncommitted to almost every single aspect of this in policy and practice. And then the Netherlands doing quite a lot to improve. And actually the Dutch, I would say, are doing by far the best when it comes to improving their approach to this. But overall, there's a real gap in terms of how militaries are ready for this. And so if that's helpful, I hope you can use this. But I do think it's an important question, like how ready are they, and where are the gaps that we'll see.
Thank you, Megan. I know we are pretty much out of time, but I'm trying to see how we can bring some closure. We had so many interesting discussions here, so much to bring. One thing we will do to try and summarize this in some kind of written form. So I would appreciate if the speakers could share your notes with us, and we'll try to put it together. And then from that, maybe we can try and derive a couple of action points, because we won't have enough time to get into those. But if there's anything you want to, maybe in the next 3 to 4 minutes, share with us as like an action agenda for us to be thinking about for research policy work, because we are at a policy conference, what would be your kind of closing points? And maybe we can end with that. What have you learned, and what could we do as a community going forward? Are there any directions we should be thinking about for young scholars and researchers as well, who want to be contributing to this field? I'll start with all of you. And you can...
I'll just end with a brief action point. I think there should be a lot of focus on military procurement and how we can keep the safeguards that are already there and add additional safeguards that are fit to understanding how these algorithmic technologies work.
Okay. So procurement would be one of your big areas for
adapted to the challenges that are brought by software, because many of the safeguards built in, especially the legal ones, are about hardware kind of bombs. So adaptive procurement procedure to build in some oversight at the door, because these technologies are procured off the shelf.
Yeah, and because these are public funding, can we also get civil society to then somehow say that we don't want our public funds to be used for procuring things that are have certain kinds of problematic aspects? But that's another.
That's the most realistic avenue I currently see for getting some.
So, any action points from you?
Yeah, I would say collaboration between academia and defense, finding concrete ways to research and understand how human machine learning interactions play out in practice, and finding kind of safe, ethical ways to test that. You know, particularly given the conflicts that we heard about at the start with the opening remarks, that these systems are kind of being deployed and tested on field. And I mean, Ukraine's been called an AI war lab, but to find kind of, I would say, safe ways to do that outside of the context of active conflict.
And civilian harm.
Yeah. So I think that collaboration is important.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Are you already linked to other policy initiatives that are going on? For example, the 𝗪𝗵 conference, or because I would, then you get a bit more mass and able to what you construct here, bring it up to a higher level, maybe get more support for the things that you were working.
Yes. I think the critique of the 𝗪𝗵 conference is that they're very heavily driven by particular stakeholders, and the kinds of discussions we're having here have not risen high enough. But that it's something we have to do.
I know that, but I also think that they're currently making more headway than the UN discussion, and I don't see the EU or NATO going somewhere on this topic. So it's actually maybe not 𝗪𝗵, but finding an avenue to.
No, maybe that brings us to Virginia, who's been involved in UN advisory bodies. Are there other mechanisms internationally we should be engaging with?
I think it should be indeed. I agree with both. So finding avenues for collaboration, that is definitely one. Also recognizing that we come from research perspective, and also from actually.
Can you close the door, please?
Very little. We don't have enough clout into the discussion, so we need to be also mindful of what we can or cannot do as this group in this room. Let's say I agree that 𝗪𝗵 would be a possible one. I think that there are also initiatives at the level of G7, G20, and whatever numbers they are putting in the Gs, which are probably relevant. It's indeed the traditional ones, so UN, NATO, European Union are at this moment, not for all kinds of reasons and different kinds of reasons, not really the big partners that can do anything in this context. So finding out alternatives, 𝗪𝗵 can be one, G20 can.
And the Convention on Autonomous Weapons, is that not something that's
people sitting in a room talking forever about the things that they talked already.
Yeah, and they're a bit, that's going on for 10 years. It's quite stuck, and there are a couple of countries who have a big interest in this topic. Who
want to make it
actively dilute it.
This is the GD.
Okay. Anything else you want to share as an action point?
Me?
Yes.
3. The first one would be, I'd be really curious also from a policy perspective, in what ways internal documents of military using those systems can be made available, like you said. Civil society could use FOIA requests, or if policy could make this visible, the structure of those kind of documents could be taken from Article 35 DPIAs in the GDPR, for example, how to approach this, how to describe this. The second thing, what I learned is like there's so much fruitful work ahead of connecting like the legal logics with the technical descriptions of those systems. I think there's still a lot to do. And the last one is, of course, we have to call out red herrings when it's actually not about the technology, but this is just a cover up for killing people.
Yeah. Okay. Megan, you're the last one to go, and you can bring us some closure.
Great, what an honor. I feel like from my point of view, maybe the best possible outcome of this could be all of us working together to kind of build this model or a framework for how to do a review of states' current approaches to AI and the risk that could bring to civilians. So anything from procurement to the actual tracking of harm, like kind of having this understanding of how do we best measure all these different indicators, be incredibly helpful, especially if you could do it across civil society, academia, and with militaries as well to understand their considerations. I think would be incredibly powerful. So hopefully we can find ways to work together in the future. And thank you so much again for having me and all of us. I think it's been incredibly interesting. So really, thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for staying for our hour-long panel. And this was the most intensive discussion I've had on this topic. So I'm really, really delighted. And there's so much we're going to have to unpack afterwards. But thank you for staying with us for this whole thing and for everyone for joining. And also want to thank Peter for helping me put this together. And we will have more to share with you soon. So
thanks for the good questions as well.
Yeah. Let's grab lunch. And Megan, I'm sorry you can't join us for lunch, but we will catch you another time.
Yeah, sounds great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone online. Yeah. Thanks, Diego and Harris. Okay. We can stop recording. Wow, we managed to do this despite so many